Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving east on County Road 12 before sunrise, heading to a job site outside of Redmond. It was late March, cold enough that the frost on the grass looked like snow in the pre-dawn light. I'd left earlier than usual because the crew wanted to pour concrete as soon as the temperature got above freezing, and I liked getting a head start on the paperwork. It was the kind of morning where the sky looked colorless, like someone had dimmed everything. There were no other cars out there, just empty farmland, a few barns in the distance, and the long, straight road stretching ahead. I didn't even have the radio on. I was just letting the heater warm my feet while I sipped the last of my gas station coffee. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed something strange ahead. Something about the horizon didn't look right. At first, I thought I was just tired or staring too long at the same point. But as I got closer, I saw it more clearly. The eastern horizon wasn't brightening evenly like it should before sunrise. Instead, there was this narrow vertical band of light, maybe as wide as a house, shining straight upward, like someone had sliced the sky open with a glowing knife. It wasn't blinding, but it was bright enough to stand out against the darker sky around it. I slowed down without really thinking about it. There wasn't anything on the road, and I didn't feel like getting any closer until I understood what I was seeing. It wasn't orange or yellow like the start of dawn. It was pale, almost white, with a hint of blue. Not the blue of a clear sky, more like the light from a fluorescent bulb. Cold and flat. It didn't spread sideways at all. It just went straight up, maybe what looked like a couple miles into the sky, if that makes sense. Too straight to be natural. I kept expecting it to widen or dim, or at least shift somehow. But it stayed perfectly narrow, perfectly vertical. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. My hands were resting on the steering wheel, and I could feel this weird tension in my chest, like the air pressure had changed. The sky was still dark, except for that column of light in the distance. I rolled my window down to listen. Nothing. No wind, no birds, not even the rumble of a far-off tractor or anything. Just the faint hum of my engine. I got out of the truck for a better view. The cold hit me right away, but I barely felt it because I was too focused on the sky. The light didn't flicker or pulse. It didn't move. It just stood there, too steady to be clouds reflecting something, too narrow to be any weather phenomenon I'd ever seen. And I'd lived in Central Oregon my whole life. I'd seen weird temperature inversions, wildfire smoke lighting things strangely, even military flares from training drills. This wasn't any of that. I stood and watched for maybe 20 seconds, trying to convince myself it was some kind of projection. Maybe someone was testing equipment on a farm. But no beam came from the ground. The light just existed on its own, suspended in the air. Then it retracted. Not like something turning off. It pulled upward like someone was dragging it toward the top of the sky. The bottom of the band faded first. The upper part stretched thinner and thinner, like it was being sucked into a point above the horizon. And then the point winked out. The sky went back to normal, completely dark, no lingering glow, no afterimage, just gone. A few seconds later, the real sunrise glow started, slow, even, spreading across the whole horizon the way it always does. The normalcy of it didn't comfort me. If anything, it made the other thing feel more out of place. I got back in the truck. My hands were shaking a little, and I noticed the heater wasn't blowing warm air anymore, even though the dial was still set to high. The airflow felt weak and cool. I turned the heater off, then on again, and after a few seconds, it came back. I don't know if that meant anything. Maybe the blower motor was just old. I started driving again, but I kept checking the horizon in my mirrors. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe it was a trick of the atmosphere. Maybe I hadn't slept enough. Maybe the angle of the road lined up with some kind of reflection. Anything was easier to believe than the idea that I'd seen something unexplainable. When I got to the job site, I didn't mention it to anyone. The morning moved on like nothing had happened. Papers to fill out, equipment checks to do, small talk with guys who'd been up even earlier than me. Around 9, the sun was well above the trees, and everything looked completely normal. But when I checked my phone during a break, I noticed something odd. The time on the lock screen was a few minutes ahead of my watch. Not a huge difference. 3 minutes, maybe a little more. But my watch syncs automatically every night. My phone should have been accurate too. I compared them again. 3 minutes apart. Later, when I got back into the truck, the dashboard clock was also off by a few minutes, but in the opposite direction, like something had made all three of them drift slightly, each in its own way. I didn't connect that to the light at first. I just set the clocks again and shrugged it off. But when I checked the dash clock the next morning, it had drifted ahead again by almost 2 minutes. My phone was normal. My watch was normal. Only the truck clock had moved. That went on for about a week. Every morning, the truck clock would be just slightly ahead, not fast enough to be a mechanical issue. Not slow either, just off, like it was following time on a different track. Eventually, it stopped drifting and stayed accurate. I never saw another strange sunrise. Nothing else unusual happened on that stretch of road. And after a few months, I stopped thinking about it as much. But the way the light retracted, that upward pull, like it was being collected rather than shutting off, that part never made sense to me. I can't explain it in terms of anything I've seen before or since. There's a point on County Road 12, right around mile marker 47, where the land dips and gives you a clear view of the eastern horizon. Sometimes I drive that way even when I don't need to, just to see if the sky looks normal. It always does. But I still remember standing in the cold, watching that narrow strip of light pull itself into the sky and vanish, like it had somewhere else to be. I was walking home from my friend Mark's place around 11 p.m. He lives only a few blocks from me in a quiet neighborhood in Duluth. Older houses, big maple trees, patchy streetlights that seem to flicker more than they stay steady. It had rained earlier, not hard, just enough to make the pavement shine under whatever light hit it. The air was cool and damp, the kind that settles in your clothes. Nothing about the night felt strange at first. I'd made the walk dozens of times. Maybe that's why the change hit so hard, because everything had been so normal up until that moment. I was cutting down Ashford Street, where the houses get farther apart and the trees lean overhead like they're trying to block out the sky. There's a stretch where only one streetlight works, and it gives off this weak yellow glow that never seems to reach the ground evenly. I remember hearing water dripping from the branches, but no wind. The whole block felt still. I stepped into the light and saw my shadow stretch out in front of me. Long, thin, distorted by the angle. Completely ordinary. Then it split. Not dramatically. No tearing or sharp movement. It was subtle, almost gentle, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. One moment I had a single shadow stretching ahead of me. The next, there were two, side by side. Almost identical, but not quite. One looked a little sharper at the edges. The other slightly lighter, like it wasn't fully committed to existing. I stopped walking. Both shadows stopped too. The air around me felt heavy in a way I can't explain. Not pressure, exactly. More like the atmosphere grew thick enough that it didn't want sound to move through it. The dripping from the branches suddenly seemed far away. I lifted my right arm. Both shadows lifted their right arms. I lowered it. Both lowered. I took a small step back. Both moved back. But when I took a step forward again, only one shadow followed in sync. The other lagged half a beat behind, like it needed a moment to remember what it was supposed to do. That was the first moment I felt real fear. Not the jolt kind, but the slow, spreading kind that makes your breath go shallow. I turned around to see if a second light source had appeared behind me, something that might explain it. A car coming, a porch light flicking on, anything. There was nothing. The houses were dark. No headlights. The sky was overcast enough that no moonlight broke through. I even checked my phone screen to see if it was bright enough to cast something faint, but it was off. When I looked forward again, my shadows had merged back into one. Cleanly. Instantly. Like the second one had never been there. But the air still felt wrong. I backed out of the streetlight's reach, pulse hammering. As soon as my foot crossed into the darker part of the block, something behind me made the faintest sound, like fabric shifting. Not loud, not aggressive, but close. Too close. I spun around, holding my breath. Nothing moved. No animals, no people. Just wet pavement and dim light reflecting off puddles. I walked faster. A minute later, when I reached the next intersection, the heaviness in the air eased and the night noises slowly returned. A car somewhere in the distance, the faint buzz of a faraway street lamp, the wind brushing against a flag on someone's porch. Things felt normal again. I kept going, trying to shake off the unease, but the thought of that second shadow stuck in my mind. I kept checking the ground whenever I passed under another streetlight, every time I had just one shadow. The right size, the right shape. Nothing strange. It wasn't until I reached my block that something else happened. I passed under a brighter LED streetlight near Mrs. Graham's driveway, and for a split second, literally a blink, my shadow stretched far longer than it should have. Like something behind me had shoved the light upward. When I turned to look, the lamp looked completely normal. But my shadow stayed slightly elongated for a moment too long before snapping back to its normal proportion. I walked the rest of the way home without stopping. My keys felt slippery in my hand, and I kept fumbling them. When I finally got the door unlocked, I went inside and locked it immediately, even though I almost never bother with that unless it's late. Inside the house, the air felt normal again. Warm, settled. My shadow looked exactly how it was supposed to under my hallway light. Nothing unusual. I should have left it at that, gone to bed, chalked the whole thing up to exhaustion or weird lighting. But something made me check the backyard through the sliding glass door. The yard was dim, lit only by a single motion light near the garage. Nothing moved. But on the concrete patio, the faint outline of a long shadow stretched toward the fence. My shadow was inside the house with me. The one outside wasn't mine. Not in position, not in angle. It was too tall, too narrow, and angled toward a part of the yard where no light should have cast anything. I stared at it without breathing. And then, as the motion light flicked off, the shadow didn't fade the way shadows should. It dissolved, not slowly, but in a soft, instant blur, like it had been wiped away. I closed the blinds. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the hallway light on, checking the edges of my shadow every time I walked past a wall. It stayed normal. Just one. Always just one. But the memory of that moment on Ashford Street kept replaying. How the second shadow hesitated. How it almost seemed to observe me. How it disappeared the second I stepped out of the light. And the way the air thickened around me, like something was standing there without making sound, waiting for me to notice it. I was halfway through making coffee when someone knocked on my door. 3 quick knocks, then nothing. It was around 8 a.m., and I'd only been awake for 15 minutes. I opened the door expecting a package or maybe one of the maintenance guys. Instead, it was my neighbor, Ellen, still in her robe and slippers, clutching a mug with both hands like she'd rushed out before it finished cooling. She didn't even say good morning. She just asked, "Were you awake around 2 last night?" I told her no, that I'd been out cold by 11. She nodded like that confirmed something for her, then said, "I saw lights over your house, bright ones, just hovering there." At first, I thought she meant a helicopter or maybe a drone, but she went on before I could ask. She described them as too bright to be drones and too still to be anything with rotors. She said they lit up the ridge of my roof like someone had parked a spotlight in the air above it. I laughed a little, more out of awkwardness than disbelief. But she didn't laugh back. She just stared at me over the rim of her mug, eyes wide, like she was waiting for me to admit something. I told her I didn't hear anything. No wind, no engines, no noises in the night. And she nodded again, slowly this time, like she'd expected that too. Before she left, she said, "You should check your camera. Maybe it caught something." I don't know why that stuck with me. Maybe because she said it so gently, like she already knew the answer. After she went home, I pulled up the footage from the night before. I only have 3 cameras. One pointed at the driveway, one at the side gate, and one mounted on the back porch under the eave, so it catches part of the yard and the roof line. The first 2 looked totally normal. A few cars passing, a raccoon climbing over the compost bin, nothing strange. The back porch camera, though, that one froze for a second when I tried to scrub through the early morning hours. When I finally got it to load, the timeline had a 3-minute chunk marked with a yellow caution symbol. Corrupted file. That had never happened before. I tapped into it anyway. The playback stuttered, jumped frames, went pixelated, cleared for half a second, then glitched again. Most of the footage showed nothing but darkness and static, but there was one moment, a split second, where the frame brightened so much that the entire image washed out to white. It wasn't lightning, it wasn't a passing car, it wasn't the porch light flipping on because the porch light was off in every clear frame before and after. It was just one stark, silent flash. Then the next frame blurred into horizontal lines, and the timestamp skipped ahead by almost 9 seconds. I replayed that section over and over. Every time the same glitch, same washed out frame, same 9-second jump. I checked the other camera's timestamps. Nothing lined up with that moment on the porch camera. They just went dark for a single second, then returned to normal. No bright flash, no corruption, just a tiny blip that could have been anything. But the back camera, the only one that could have caught something above the house, acted like someone wiped a piece of the night off the recording. I opened the window above my sink and leaned out to look at the roof. Nothing unusual, no scorch marks, no debris, no sign anything had touched it. Just dew glistening on the shingles. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something had happened up there. Later that afternoon, I walked around the yard, partly to reassure myself, partly because I couldn't stop thinking about the missing footage. The grass was undisturbed, no footprints except mine. No broken branches from the maple tree, just a quiet, ordinary yard. But near the back corner of the house, right underneath the roof peak, I noticed something faint, almost invisible unless the light hit it right. A thin layer of dust or pollen had settled everywhere from the wind the day before, but in that one patch of siding, there was a shape where the dust hadn't stuck. Oval, maybe 2 feet wide, like something warm had hovered close enough to dry the dew and repel the dust. I touched it. The siding wasn't warm now, but the texture felt slightly smoother there, like whatever had touched it had wiped clean a spot the size of a small backpack. That detail unsettled me more than the camera glitch. The rest of the day passed normally. I ran errands, I answered emails. I tried to forget about the porch footage, but every so often I'd catch myself staring at the camera feed on my phone, waiting for something else to flicker or warp. That night, I left the back porch camera recording on a higher frame rate just to see if anything would happen again. I sat on the couch with the lights low, listening for any hum, any vibration, any sign that something was overhead. Midnight came and went without incident, but around 12:40, the house got unnervingly quiet. Not silent, quiet in a way that made me aware of how much noise usually fills a home at night. The fridge hum felt distant. The heater didn't kick on. Even the clock on the microwave sounded dampened, like someone had stuffed cotton around it. I stepped outside. The air was still. No wind. No insects. The neighbor's porch light across the street flickered unsteadied. I looked up. Nothing. No lights. No movement. Just a blank, indifferent sky. I stayed outside for a minute, then went back in, feeling foolish. When I checked the camera feed again before bed, the recording was fine. No glitches. No flashes. Just darkness, then me stepping outside like an idiot to stare at nothing. I didn't look at the footage again until the next morning. Everything looked normal until I noticed a tiny hitch, a single skipped frame at 12:42 a.m. Just one. No light, no sound, no distortion, but the timestamp jumped forward by 1 full second. 1 second missing from the night. I don't know if Ellen saw what she thought she saw. I don't know what caused the flash or the oval-shaped clean patch on the siding. I don't know why only the back camera glitched and the others didn't. But something was above my house that night. Something bright. Something that didn't make a sound. Something didn't want to be recorded. And whatever it was, it managed to erase just enough of itself to leave me wondering what filled the missing seconds. I was sitting in my car outside Pine Hollow Market, one of those tiny convenience stores off Highway 14 that somehow stays open, even though I've never seen more than 3 people inside at once. It was around 9:45 p.m., already full dark, with a light mist rolling in from the Columbia River. I'd stopped there after work to grab something to eat before heading home to Carson. Honestly, I just needed 5 quiet minutes before dealing with the rest of the night. I wasn't in any hurry, so I stayed parked with the engine off, scrolling through my messages while the windows fogged a little from my breath. The parking lot had only two other cars, a dusty Subaru by the propane cage and an older pickup near the dumpster. Neither of them had anyone inside. The store lights buzzed faintly, that tired yellow glow that looks older than it should. I was mid-scroll when I felt it. A vibration through the seat, not the engine. Again, it was off, not my phone, not my watch. It was deeper than any of those. More like a shift, a low, muted tremor that ran through the whole car, but not through the ground beneath it. The steering wheel didn't shake. The dashboard didn't tremble. Only the seat. It lasted maybe half a second. Enough to make me sit upright and stare at the windshield like something should be there. Nothing was. The lot was still. The mist drifting across the pavement barely moved. Even the tall pines behind the store weren't swaying. No wind at all. I checked the mirrors without thinking. That's when I saw the glow. A faint one, almost too faint to notice, hovering somewhere behind the car. It wasn't a reflection of my phone or the store lights. It had a softer quality, a pale bluish tint that didn't match anything in the environment. It lingered right in the center of the rearview mirror, not moving, not brightening, not fading, just existing. I twisted in my seat to look directly out the back window. Nothing there. When I looked forward again, the glow in the mirror was still present, barely, like it only existed when I wasn't looking straight at it. A small part of me wondered if it was some kind of afterimage, but I hadn't looked at anything bright, and the glow wasn't the size or shape of headlights. Too small, too circular, like a single point diffused across the mirror. I leaned closer. It flickered. Not a normal flicker either. It didn't blink out and back like a bulb losing power. It shimmered, like heat rising off pavement, just once, a tiny waver in the reflection. Then it vanished. I stayed perfectly still for a moment, waiting for my heart to stop thudding in my chest. The lot around me hadn't changed. The store remained empty except for the clerk, who I could see restocking cigarettes behind the counter. Nothing unusual, but the air inside the car felt different. Denser, almost. Like someone had just left the seat next to me. I reached back and touched the rear cushion. Warm. Warmer than the rest of the car. I pulled my hand back and sat stiffly, staring at the empty back seat until my eyes watered from not blinking. After a few seconds, I cracked the door open, half expecting to hear something. Wind, movement, anything. But it was silent out there. The mist made everything soft and distant. No other cars pulled in. No one walked by. Even the clerk didn't look up. I stepped out of the car. The first thing I noticed was that there were no tracks around the back of my vehicle. The mist had left a thin sheen on the pavement, and it showed everything. Tire marks, shoe prints, drips from car doors. But behind my car, the surface was untouched. No footprints, no dropped object, nothing that could have created a glow. I crouched a little, looking under the bumper. Nothing. When I turned to look behind me toward the line of pines bordering the lot, I felt that same subtle pressure shift in my ears that I'd only ever felt during sudden altitude changes. It wasn't painful, just wrong. The trees stood still. The mist hung motionless among them. Something in me wanted very badly to get back inside the car. I did. I locked the doors, even though I wasn't sure what good that would do. The back seat looked normal again. No glow in the mirror, no warmth on the cushion, no vibration. I started the engine. The moment it turned over, all the lights inside the car flickered. Not off, just dim. Only for a second. Like the battery had dipped, although it was a new battery and never had issues before. When the lights steadied, the clock on the dashboard read 9:13 p.m. I stared at it. I knew for a fact it had been at least 9:40 when I pulled into the lot. I checked my phone, 9:28 p.m. Somewhere between the seat vibration and the glow in the mirror, I'd lost 12 minutes. Or the car had jumped backward 12 minutes. I don't know which explanation bothered me more. I backed out slowly, headlights sweeping across the empty lot. The mist seemed thicker than before, swallowing the light a few feet in front of the bumper. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, not because I wanted the glow to reappear, but because I needed to know if it did. Nothing showed in the mirror. But as I pulled onto the highway, the pressure in my ears returned for a single moment. A quick pop, then relief. At the exact same time, something faint lit up the treetops in my peripheral vision. A pale flash reflected off the mist. Not bright, not wide, just a small, quick flare. Gone before I could turn my head fully. The radio crackled with static even though it was off. Not loud, just a tiny burst like someone whispering through a bad connection. Then silence. The rest of the drive home was normal. Too normal. Every mile felt like it was smoothing over something I wasn't supposed to notice. When I pulled into my driveway, I checked the back seat again. I don't know why. Habit, fear, curiosity, take your pick. The cushion that had been warm earlier was now cold. Not cool. Cold, as if the car had been sitting in the shade all day, untouched. The next morning, the clock in the car had corrected itself without me touching it. My phone never changed. I still don't know what the vibration was, or what caused the glow, or why neither one left so much as a mark on the pavement. But every time I look into the rearview mirror now, even in broad daylight, I half expect to see that faint shimmer again, hovering in a place where nothing should be. I was sitting behind my house in Grand Junction, just trying to cool off from the heat that had hung around all day. It was close to 10:30 p.m., one of those late summer nights where the air finally stops feeling heavy after sundown. I dragged an old folding chair out to the patch of gravel behind the garage, mostly because the house felt stuffy and I didn't feel like running the AC. The sky was mostly clear, except for a few long, thin clouds drifting west. I wasn't out there for any reason, just needed fresh air, needed space from screens, needed something quiet. I didn't even turn on the porch light. I just sat in the dark with a bottle of water, listening to the distant hum of the highway. A couple minutes in, my ears suddenly popped. Not like when you go up a mountain or fly. This was sharper, like a quick pressure change just behind the eardrums. It made me jolt upright. Both ears at the same time, like a snap from inside my head. The air hadn't shifted. No breeze. No temperature change. Nothing to explain it. I waited for a second pop, thinking maybe I'd swallowed weird or moved wrong, but nothing followed. The quiet seemed deeper, though. The distant traffic felt muted. The cicadas that had been buzzing earlier were silent. I tilted my head, testing my hearing. Everything sounded normal enough, but underneath it all there was this faint, low hum. Not from the highway, not electrical, more like the kind of vibration you feel rather than hear. That was when I noticed the light. It was small, really small, like a distant star, except it wasn't where any star should have been. This was lower, maybe a little above the cloud line. A single point of pale white light drifting horizontally across the gap between two thin clouds. Slow and steady. Too slow for a plane, but too smooth for anything drifting like a balloon or lantern. At first I thought it might just be a star peeking through a moving cloud, but the clouds weren't moving that fast and the light wasn't holding its position. It was deliberately moving, like it had somewhere to go. I watched it glide for maybe 10 seconds. No blinking, no change in size. Just a steady glide, almost hypnotic. Then the pressure in my ears shifted again. Another subtle pop, softer this time. The hum beneath everything deepened for a moment. The point of light dipped. Not much, just a tiny drop, maybe a couple degrees downward, but enough to prove it wasn't something fixed in the distance. Then it angled up slowly, almost like it was correcting itself. I stood up without realizing I'd done it. My legs felt unsteady, not from fear exactly, but from that weird instinct you get when something breaks the pattern of the world. I stepped forward into the yard, gravel crunching under my shoes. The light drifted behind a thin cloud, dimming a little but not disappearing. I kept my eyes trained on it, waiting for it to blink like a plane would. It didn't. When it emerged from the other side, it paused. I swear, it paused. It hung in place without drifting for maybe 2 full seconds, like it was thinking or observing or recalibrating. The hum in the air got slightly stronger during that pause, just enough to make my chest feel tight. Then the light moved again, but this time vertically. Straight up, smooth as before. Nothing accelerated, nothing changed brightness. It just climbed, slow and deliberate. As it rose, the pressure in my ears faded. The hum eased up too. The light kept climbing until it reached a part of the sky where the stars were brighter. Then it stopped again. For a moment it blended in too well. I thought I'd lost it. The sky was scattering with stars, and the point looked almost identical to the others. I was about to give up when it shifted to the left just a hair, enough to catch my attention again. It held there for a long moment. I had no clue what I was looking at. My brain kept trying to label it. Satellite, airplane, drone, but none of those moved like this. I must have stood there for a full minute watching the tiny point hover, waiting for anything else to happen. Then it dimmed, not like it was getting farther, but like someone was turning down a dial. A soft fade, no flicker. It faded until it matched the brightness of the dimmest stars. Then it faded more, then it vanished. The moment it disappeared, my ears popped one last time. Pressure releasing, like the atmosphere around me had been slightly distorted and suddenly corrected itself. The cicadas started up again, just like that. The hum underneath everything vanished too. The night returned to normal in this abrupt, casual way that made everything feel even stranger. I stayed outside another 20 minutes, scanning the sky, telling myself it had to be something ordinary. A trick of perspective, a weird plane, a satellite doing something unusual. Anything. Nothing else showed up. The sky looked exactly the same as any other night. When I finally went inside, my phone charging on the kitchen counter had switched its time for some reason. It showed 10:52, even though I was sure I'd come outside at 10:30. The clock on the stove still said 10:37. I thought maybe the phone had reset itself or lost signal, but the Wi-Fi was fine and there were no notifications about any restart. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because of fear exactly, more because of the feeling that something had moved through the sky. Something close enough to affect the air around me, and I had seen only one small point of it. The next evening, I went back outside at the same time, hoping I'd see something again just to make it feel explainable. Nothing happened. Clear sky, normal sounds, normal everything. But the memory of that subtle hum stayed with me, especially because of the way it stopped the instant the light vanished. Like whatever that point was, it hadn't just been drifting, it had been here, and then it left. I was hiking the north ridge of Ponderosa Trail late in the afternoon, trying to squeeze in one more loop before the weather changed. The forecast said a cold front was coming in overnight, but the sky still looked mostly clear. Thin streaks of clouds, pale blue fading toward gray. I'd done that ridge dozens of times, enough that I barely had to think about where I was going. It was early October, and the temperature had dropped fast once the sun dipped behind the western ridge. The air had that dry, metallic edge that tells you winter is coming. I'd parked at the trailhead around 4:30 and figured I had at least an hour and a half of daylight left. About halfway up, I stopped at a flat overlook where the trail bends along a rocky ledge. It's one of the only places with a clean view east, all the way across the valley. I pulled out my compass, mostly habit, even though the trail is well marked, and held it level. The needle was off. Not by a lot, just a few degrees, enough that it wasn't pointing precisely toward the notch in the hills where true north usually lines up. I tapped the side of the compass, thinking maybe I'd jostled it or there was some iron in the rocks messing with it. The needle drifted even farther. It didn't swing wildly or jump. It just eased left by maybe another 2 degrees, like it was being nudged by some invisible force. I rotated myself slowly, trying to see if it was a positional thing. No matter how I turned, the needle settled into that wrong angle. Not frantically, more like it had found a new resting place and preferred it. I should have shrugged it off, but something about how smooth the movement was got under my skin. I stood there longer than I needed to, waiting to see if it would shift again. It didn't. The air felt quiet in a way I didn't like. The wind, which had been pushing through the pines earlier, had slowed to almost nothing. Even the distant highway noise that usually drifted up from the valley felt muted. I kept walking, telling myself it was just some mineral deposit in the rock messing with basic magnetism. That happens. People talk about it. Still, I checked the compass twice more in the next few minutes. Both times, the needle held that slight wrong angle. By the time I reached the ridge crest, the sun was nearly down. The sky over the valley had turned this washed-out lavender color with darker clouds building on the far horizon. I was planning to turn around at the next bend anyway, just to be safe before it got dark. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't bright or moving fast. It was just this dim, pale point, barely visible, hovering low above the eastern horizon. It looked like a star, but brighter than anything else in that patch of sky and too low to be a star anyway. I watched it, expecting it to flicker or shift as the clouds moved. It didn't. It held perfectly still for maybe 5 seconds, then it pulsed. Not a flash, not a blink, just a single pulse. Like a heartbeat. A soft brightening and dimming, no color change, no motion. The pulse lasted maybe half a second. Then the light vanished. Not faded, not hidden by cloud. One moment it existed, the next it didn't. I stayed rooted in place, waiting for it to reappear. My first thought was plane lights, or maybe someone's drone at a crazy distance. But no drone would be that steady or that far out. And no plane lights just pulse once and disappear. The air temperature dropped suddenly. A cold gust hit the ridge out of nowhere, sharp enough that it made my eyes water. I turned instinctively to look behind me, making sure no one else was on the trail. Empty. Nobody. I pulled the compass out again, even though I already knew what I'd see. The needle was still off true north, sitting at that weird slight angle. But as I watched, it drifted again. Very slowly, like someone turning a dial, the needle moved another degree or two to the left. It didn't wobble, it didn't overshoot. It just realigned itself, settling into a new direction that made no sense. I turned in a full circle, scanning the woods. Nothing but pines and rocks and the low hiss of wind starting in the treetops again. When I looked back at the compass, the needle had stopped moving. It pointed toward the spot on the horizon where the light had appeared. I didn't want to believe that meant anything. It could have been coincidence, a trick of perspective, anything. But the longer I stared at it, the more it felt like the compass wasn't pointing north anymore. It was pointing at something else. The sky dimmed quickly after that. The last bit of sunlight slipped behind the ridge and the valley dropped into darkness. I didn't feel like staying on the overlook any longer. I turned back down the trail, walking faster than I needed to. I kept checking over my shoulder even though I knew nothing was following me. Halfway down, the forest went quiet. Not fully silent, just suddenly less alive. The wind stopped. No rustling, no insects. The air got heavy again, like it had when the compass first shifted. I slowed my pace, breathing through my nose, listening for anything unusual. My boots on the dirt sounded too sharp, like the sound wasn't being absorbed by the trees the way it usually is. I pulled the compass out once more. The needle didn't move this time. It was stuck, pointing at that same wrong angle. Dead steady. I put it away quickly. As I descended the ridge, the quiet lifted in small, uneven moments. First, the wind returned, brushing through the branches. Then a bird called somewhere deeper in the woods. Then the distant highway noise crept back in. By the time I reached the parking lot, everything felt normal again, except for one thing. The sky above the eastern ridge had a faint discoloration. Not a glow, just a smear of pale brightness that didn't match the rest of the dusk. I blinked a few times, trying to see if it was just the after image of the earlier light. But even after I looked away and looked back, the smear was still there. A subtle patch of lighter sky that didn't belong. I didn't stay to examine it. I got in my car and started the engine. The clock read 6:12 p.m. My phone, which I'd checked before leaving the house, said 5:58. I hadn't been on the trail long enough to lose 14 minutes. I drove home with the compass sitting in the passenger seat. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to see the needle anymore. When I checked it the next day, it had returned to normal, perfectly aligned with true north. But I remember the angle it held on the ridge and the light that pulsed once above the horizon. One moment there, then gone. Leaving the air colder behind it, like something immense had moved quietly across the sky and left no trace except for the direction a compass preferred. The power went out a little after 11 p.m. I was sitting on the couch in my duplex in Waterville, scrolling on my phone with the TV playing some cooking show in the background. Everything just clicked off at once. The TV, the fridge hum, the hallway light I'd forgotten to turn off. The whole house went dark in a single, clean snap. I figured it was just the usual winter outage. We get them whenever the wind decides to push the lines around, but that night was calm. No storm, barely any breeze at all. Just cold, low 20s with a dry kind of stillness that made the neighborhood sound empty. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and walked to the front window, mostly out of habit. The whole street was dark. A couple houses down the road, someone stepped outside with their own flashlight, sweeping it along their driveway. I didn't bother calling the power company. In a town this small, you just wait it out. After a few minutes of pacing around, I stepped outside too. The moon wasn't out, and without the usual glow from houses and streetlights, everything felt strangely flat, quiet in a way that made you aware of your own breathing. I walked a little further into the yard to look at the sky. Normally, with the lights out, you can see a ton of stars. But that night, the sky looked dim, washed out somehow, like something was muting it. Then I noticed the glow. It wasn't bright. It wasn't dramatic. It was this faint, bluish patch hovering high above the street, larger than a star, smaller than the moon. More like a softly lit cloud, except there were no clouds overhead, just open sky. The glow didn't pulse or shift. It just held there, steady, as if something behind it was shining through. At first I thought maybe it was a plane reflecting light from somewhere, but the glow didn't move at all. And the power was out across the whole block. There wasn't any place for the light to come from. I stepped farther into the yard, almost to the sidewalk. The blue patch wasn't huge, but it was definitely big enough to see clearly. Oval-shaped, maybe. Hard to tell because the edges were blurry, like fogged glass. A few neighbors had walked outside by then too, but nobody else seemed to be looking up. They were all checking their breakers or talking quietly. I kept staring. After maybe 20 seconds, something about the air felt wrong. Like pressure changing before a storm, but reversed. It felt lighter, almost hollow. My ears didn't pop, but I felt that strange, empty sensation behind them. Then the glow dimmed just slightly, almost unnoticeably at first. It was like someone lowering a dimmer switch slowly. The blue faded to gray, then to nothing, leaving the sky looking normal again, just a dark winter sky with a handful of scattered stars. A second later, my porch light clicked on behind me. Just one click. No flicker. All up and down the street, house lights came back on like someone had thrown a giant switch. I heard TVs rebooting, appliances buzzing awake. A transformer hummed back to life somewhere behind the houses. I turned back toward my own place. The living room lamp I'd left on lit up yellow in the front window. Everything looked normal again. But when I stepped inside, the air felt warmer than it had before the outage. Not by much, just enough that I could tell the difference. And my phone, which I'd left on the coffee table, showed the time as 11:52 p.m. The outage had only lasted maybe 10 minutes, but my phone battery had dropped from 68% to 41% while it had been sitting untouched in the dark. I hadn't used it. I hadn't even moved it. I plugged it in and went back outside for another look at the sky. The patch didn't return. Nothing moved, no strange colors, no clouds, just the same quiet stars that should have been there all along. I thought maybe I'd imagined the glow, or misinterpreted it, or seen something ordinary in an unusual context. But when I looked across the street, the neighbor who'd stepped out earlier, her name's Donna, was still standing in her driveway, staring upward with this blank, unsure expression. She looked at me across the road and quietly asked, "Did you see that too?" I almost said no reflexively, but I nodded. She pointed up. "It was right there, wasn't it?" "Yeah," I said. "Blue." She didn't answer, just lowered her arm and went back inside. I stayed out a little longer, trying to shake off the weird feeling. The air had gone still again. Nothing unusual. No sounds, no strange colors. Just an ordinary night after an ordinary outage. But when I finally went back in, the temperature difference struck me again. The house wasn't just warm. It felt like it had absorbed heat while the power was off. Not from people moving around, not from appliances, just a lingering warmth in the walls and air. I went back to the window and pressed my hand against the glass. It should have been cold. The outside temperature was barely above 20 degrees, but the glass felt almost room temperature. Not warm, not hot, just wrong. I kept checking the sky for the next hour, but nothing else happened. No more outages, no more blue glow, no odd noises. The night drifted back toward normal, the sky settling into its usual winter darkness. But the next morning, when I looked out my bedroom window, I saw something strange on the frost that had formed overnight. A faint oval patch, maybe 2 feet across, where the frost hadn't formed at all, directly beneath the part of the sky where the glow had been. And even though the room was cold, that patch of glass felt just a little warmer than the rest, like it remembered something the rest of the window didn't. I was driving back from my sister's place in Medford, heading north on a rural stretch of Highway 62 that cuts through a lot of empty fields and patches of forest. It was close to midnight, cold but not freezing, the kind of night where the air feels clean and empty. I wasn't tired, just bored, letting the radio fill the silence. Hardly any cars out that way at that hour. That part of the drive is mostly straight, with long gaps between houses. No streetlights, just darkness and whatever your headlights pick up. I'd taken the road 100 times, but that night something felt a little off. Not bad, just odd. Like the sky was too quiet, or maybe the fields were swallowing sound. A few miles past Shady Cove, I came around a gentle bend, and my headlights caught something in the air ahead. The best way I can describe it is this. Imagine shining your high beams on a road sign that isn't there, except the reflection is way too high and the angle's all wrong. The light bounced off something metallic, smooth, curved maybe, but it wasn't shaped like anything I recognized. The reflection came back at me in this pale flash, not bright enough to blind me, but enough to make my foot ease off the gas. I thought it might be a drone at first. People mess with them out there sometimes. But a drone wouldn't have been that big or that quiet or reflect light that way. And it wouldn't have been stationary. This thing wasn't moving when I first saw it. I kept rolling forward, maybe 50 miles an hour, trying to understand what I'd seen. The metal glint reappeared a few seconds later, floating maybe 20 feet above the road. This time it caught the light more clearly, just a sliver of rounded surface, like the edge of something with a curve to it. No visible wings, no blinking lights. Then it tilted, not like an aircraft banking, more like something adjusting itself, pivoting on an invisible axis. A slow, deliberate tilt, just a few degrees like it was turning to look at me. And then it moved upward. But it didn't accelerate. It didn't ramp up speed at all. It just went straight up, perfectly vertical, like someone pulled it by a string. 1 second it was there, the next it rose into the darkness and disappeared past the reach of my headlights. No sound, no wind, no shake to the car. Nothing. I braked hard, bringing my truck down to a crawl. I leaned forward over the wheel, staring into the black sky, waiting for a red or white indicator light to appear, something that would make it all feel normal. Nothing came back. The road around me felt suddenly larger, like the fields on either side had pulled away. My ears rang slightly, not loud, just a low, steady pressure. I pulled over to the gravel shoulder. I don't know why. Some instinct to stop moving, maybe. The night seemed wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I rolled the window down. The air outside was colder than it had any right to be, like it had just been stirred by something huge. I shut off the radio and listened. There were no insects, no distant engines, no dogs barking from the farms nearby. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Just silence, deep and wide, settling over everything. After a minute or two, I stepped out of the truck. The gravel crunched under my boots in a way that felt too sharp, like the sound didn't fit the environment. I walked a few feet toward the center of the road and looked up, my breath fogged in front of me. That metallic reflection, whatever produced it, should have left some clue. A shadow, a flicker, anything. The sky was empty, but then the pressure in my ears shifted again. A little pop, and immediately afterward, the air above me brightened, just slightly, as if something moved through a patch of cloud I couldn't see. Not a light exactly, more like the sky itself changed color for a fraction of a second, a faint bluish tint. Here, then gone. I took a step backward without meaning to. Wasn't conscious. That reaction wasn't conscious. Nothing followed. No sound, no light, no movement. Eventually I got back in the truck and kept driving, but slower than before. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting that metallic glint to appear behind me, suspended in the darkness. It never did. But the weird thing happened when I stopped for gas in Prospect, maybe 20 minutes later. I went inside the station to grab a bottle of water. When I came back out, the digital clock on my dashboard said 12:58 a.m. My phone said 12:47, 11 minutes off. I hadn't touched the clock. I hadn't even noticed it change. I reset it manually, trying not to think about it. The drive from there was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the idea that something had passed over the truck or around it after that upward movement. Something I didn't see. The next day, I went back out to the same stretch of road just to see it in daylight. I tried to find anything metallic that my headlights might have bounced off. A signpost, a piece of equipment, a ducting pipe left on the side of the road. Anything. There was nothing. Not even a fence tall enough to reflect light from that angle. Just open field and a few distant barns. I stood there a long time, looking up into the sky the way I had the night before. It looked normal, wide and quiet and empty. But the whole time, the hairs on my arms kept rising like someone was standing behind me, staring over my shoulder. I didn't hear anything that time. No pressure shift, no tint in the air. Just that feeling again. The one that hit me right before I woke up this morning. Like something had seen me see it and then simply went straight up, out of reach. I woke up with this sharp, uncomfortable awareness that I hadn't been alone in the room. It wasn't a noise that woke me, not anything physical. Just that feeling like someone had been standing too close, staring. My eyes snapped open before my brain had even caught up. The house was quiet, dark. Nothing obviously wrong. But the air felt different. I sleep in a small upstairs bedroom in a rented townhouse in Spokane. It's not drafty or anything, but it's usually cool at night because the windows are old. That morning, if you can call it morning, since it was still pitch black outside, the air around me felt normal temperature except for one spot, near the window. The window was maybe 4 feet from the foot of my bed, and when I sat up, I could tell immediately the air by that wall was warmer. Not warm like a heater blowing, more like someone had been standing there for a while. A subtle pocket of heat in an otherwise cold room. I swung my legs out of bed slowly, trying to listen for anything. The noise my mattress made sounded too loud. My heartbeat did too. I stood up and walked toward the window, stopping halfway because something about the air felt wrong. It wasn't just warmer, it felt denser, like stepping into a space someone had just moved out of. I reached out and touched the window pane. It wasn't cold. It should have been cold. It was below freezing outside. That window always fogged a little on the inside at night. But the glass felt just barely cool, like it had been warmed from the room side or the outside had stopped being cold for a moment. I checked the latch, still locked. I checked the curtain, slightly parted. Not much, maybe an inch. Enough that someone could see in if they were close. I always close it all the way before bed. I didn't want to look outside at first, but curiosity beat out fear. I pulled the curtain fully open. The street was empty. A single street light across the road cast this orange glow onto the frost-covered lawn. Nobody was around. No cars. Nothing moving. But the air right next to me still felt warmer, like I was standing next to a space heater that had been switched off a few seconds before. I stayed there, looking out, trying to make sense of it. That's when I noticed something else. The pattern of frost on the outside of the glass wasn't even. It was melted in one vertical streak, directly at eye level, like something had pressed close enough to warm the glass from the outside. A perfect patch, maybe 4 inches across, shaped like nothing I could immediately identify. Just a smooth oval where the frost didn't form. I touched the glass again. That oval spot was the warmest part. I turned back toward my bed, scanning the room like I expected to find someone still hiding in it. Everything was exactly where I left it the night before. The pile of clothes in the corner, the water bottle on the nightstand, the half-open closet door. Nothing out of place. But the room felt wrong in a way I couldn't put into words. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. It said 3:41 a.m. Before I went to sleep, I'd check the time around 11:20. I usually sleep 7 hours unless something wakes me, but I didn't feel like I'd been asleep long at all. I didn't feel groggy or rested, just startled. I opened the window a crack, even though it was freezing outside. The moment it slid open, the warm pocket of air vanished. Cold air rushed in, sharp enough to sting. I leaned out and looked down at the narrow strip of soil and concrete walkway beneath the window. The frost there was disturbed. Not footprints exactly. There wasn't enough surface to show a clear one, but something had brushed across the frost in an uneven arc, smudging it, like someone had stepped too close to the wall or leaned against it. Except the arc didn't match the shape of a person leaning. It was too smooth, too symmetrical, almost like a curved shadow had swept through the frost. I shut the window again. My heart was pounding harder than the situation justified, but something deep in my brain was telling me to be cautious. to move slowly. I checked the rest of the house even though I doubted anything had come inside. The doors were locked, the downstairs windows were locked, nothing disturbed on the counters or tables. The silence felt strange, though. It wasn't the usual middle-of-the-night quiet. It was deeper than that, like the house wasn't breathing with me. When I went back upstairs to my room, the air had cooled to normal, but the warm smell, barely noticeable but distinct, still lingered. Not a human smell, not sweat or deodorant or cologne, more like the smell of warm electronics after they've been running too long, that faint metallic scent. I sat on the edge of the bed and forced myself to pay attention to how I felt physically. No dizziness, no headache, no nausea, just adrenaline and confusion. Then I noticed the time again, 3:41 a.m. I'd been moving around the house for at least 10 minutes. I checked my phone screen again, thinking maybe it was frozen. It updated automatically and still said 3:41. I opened the clock app, toggled to world time, then back. Still 3:41. I walked to the living room clock. It said 3:47, 6 minutes ahead. I reset my phone. When it powered back on, the time jumped to 3:48 to match the wall clock. I didn't like that at all. I stayed awake until dawn because something in me refused to close my eyes again. Around 6:30, with the sun just barely coming up, I went outside to look at the frost patch again. It had refrozen in the spot below my window, but not evenly. The oval shape was still visible as a thinner layer of frost, like whatever warmed it left a trace. I haven't been able to stop thinking about that oval. The height didn't match a person standing. Too high for a crouch, too low for someone standing on the ground, right in line with my window, angled just slightly upward, as if something had been floating there, watching through the glass, and whatever it was had only moved away a moment before I woke up. I was driving home from a late shift on a Thursday night, taking the old county road through the hills because the highway was shut down for construction. It was close to 1 a.m., and the fog was thick enough that I had to keep the window cracked so I wouldn't nod off. The road winds a lot out there. Sharp bends, long stretches with no shoulder, nothing but trees pressing in on both sides. I'd driven it plenty of times, but never in fog like that. My headlights caught almost nothing past 20 feet. Just a white wall, then vague shapes of branches leaning over the road. The mist looked like it was moving sideways instead of drifting upward. I kept both hands on the wheel, leaning forward slightly as if that would help. About 15 minutes in, I reached a long, straight stretch that usually gave me a bit of relief. You can normally see a quarter mile ahead on it, but that night I couldn't see more than maybe 50 feet. Everything was swallowed by fog. The road felt too quiet, like the sound from my engine didn't echo off anything. Then I saw lights ahead, 2 of them, like headlights, but too high. They hovered in the fog maybe 12 or 15 feet off the ground. At first I thought it was a truck cresting a hill or bouncing over a bump, but the road there is flat and the lights weren't bobbing. They were steady, too steady. I slowed down without realizing it. The lights didn't move closer or farther. They just hovered ahead of me, glowing softly through the fog. Not bright white like LED headlights, more like a pale yellow, warmer, older. As I drove forward, keeping my foot light on the brake, the lights rose even higher. Subtle at first, almost like they were drifting up with the fog itself. When they reached what had to be 20 feet above the road, I felt a strange pressure in my ears, like when you drive up a mountain too fast. Not painful, just wrong. I rolled the window down farther and stuck my head out slightly. No noise. No engine. Nothing. The air was cold, heavy with moisture, the kind of cold that sits on your skin. As I got within maybe 100 feet of the lights, they shifted slightly to the left, smoothly, with no wobble. A vehicle couldn't do that. Not suspended at that height. My foot fully hovered over the brake pedal at that point, but I didn't stop. I just crept forward, barely going 20. Then the fog thinned for a moment, like a breeze passed through the trees, even though no wind touched my car. In that brief opening, the lights vanished. Not faded. Not moved behind something. Vanished. Like they'd never been there. I braked harder than I meant to. My seatbelt caught me as the car jolted. The fog closed in again immediately, thick as before, hiding everything past a few car lengths. I sat there in the middle of the road, breathing hard, gripping the wheel. I leaned forward, scanning the fog for any shape or movement. Nothing, just a glowing sheet of white. I pulled over as much as I could, there wasn't really a shoulder, and turned on my hazards. The blinking orange reflected strangely in the fog, like it was bouncing off something that wasn't there. After a minute, I stepped out of the car. The silence was unreal. No insects, no wind, no distant engines. Just that muted, suffocating quiet you get in deep fog. Even my footsteps sounded wrong, like they were being swallowed before they hit the air. I walked a few feet ahead of the car, hands shoved into my jacket pockets. The fog swirled low around my knees, almost like smoke. For a second, I thought I saw movement off to the right. Another pair of lights deeper in the woods. But when I blinked, they were gone, or maybe they'd never been there. I waited, listening. My ears popped again, a tiny shift of pressure that made my stomach tense. Then a faint flicker appeared above the road, very faint, almost like a reflection. 2 pale pinpoints, exactly where the lights had been. They didn't brighten, they didn't drift, they just hung there like distant stars caught in the wrong place. I took one step toward them. The fog thinned for a second time, just a slit opening in the mist. The pinpoints vanished again, gone. I backed up toward my car without turning around. Not running, but moving fast enough that the gravel crunched loudly under my boots. I got inside, shut the door, and locked it even though I had no idea what locking it would accomplish. When I got moving again, I kept my speed low. The fog felt thicker than before, almost textured, like it clung to the car. My headlights made nothing but a tunnel of white. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting those lights to appear behind me at the same impossible height. They didn't. But the pressure changes kept happening. Tiny pops in my ears, every minute or so, until I got closer to town. The fog started lifting after another few miles, dissolving into patches. I realized I'd been gripping the wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. When I finally reached the first traffic light on the edge of town, the world looked normal again. Streetlights, quiet intersections, wet pavement reflecting the yellow glow. I pulled into an empty gas station to steady myself. My dashboard clock said 1:44. My phone said 1:36. I stared at both for a long time. 8 minutes gone or gained, I couldn't tell which. When I got home, I sat in the driveway with the engine off, listening for anything unusual. The night sounded normal. Crickets, the faint hum of the neighbor's AC, a dog barking, a few houses down. But when I thought back to the lights in the fog, the height, the direction they moved, the way they vanished, no car could have done that. No equipment truck, no ATV, nothing that should exist on a rural road in the middle of the night. A few days later, I drove the same road again, in daylight. I even stopped at the spot where I thought I'd seen the lights hovering. The trees were dense, branches interwoven, no towers or poles or anything that could have reflected a distant vehicle's headlights. The road was empty, just the hum of insects and a breeze through the leaves. But standing there, I felt the same faint pressure in my ears, like something had been above me the night before, and maybe hadn't gone as far as I hoped. The power went out a little after 9 p.m., right when I was halfway through reheating leftovers. The microwave clicked off, the lights went dark, and the house fell into that strange, hollow quiet you only get during a blackout. I thought it was just our block at first, but when I stepped outside, the whole neighborhood was dark. Street lamps, porches, even the gas station sign down at the corner. It had been unseasonably warm for March, and the air felt heavy, like it might rain even though the forecast said clear skies. A thin layer of clouds drifted low overhead, just enough to hide the stars. Without the usual glow of the city lights, everything looked washed out and colorless. A couple of my neighbors came out too, Carl from across the street and Mrs. Henson from next door. We exchanged the usual "powers out for you too," and shrugged at each other. It wasn't storming, no wind, no lightning, just an abrupt blackout. I stood on my driveway, mostly because sitting in a dark house sounded miserable. The air smelled like warm asphalt and someone's laundry detergent drifting from an open window. Carl made a joke about calling the power company, then went back inside. Mrs. Henson stayed a minute longer, scanning the sky like she expected something interesting to happen, then sighed and shuffled back indoors. I stayed out, leaning on my car, listening to the quiet. It wasn't total silence. There were still crickets, and somewhere far off a dog barked, but the usual electrical hum was gone. No AC units droning, no streetlight buzz, no faint highway noise, just natural sounds that felt too exposed without the rest. I checked my phone. No service, not even one bar. Wi-Fi was down too, obviously. For some reason, that bothered me more than the blackout. A few minutes passed, maybe 10. Hard to say. I wasn't really paying attention until something changed. The clouds overhead, just one section of them, maybe the size of a football field, started glowing faint blue. Not bright enough to light the ground. More like the inside of the clouds were softly lit from behind, a muted, cold shade of blue that didn't match lightning or reflections or anything I'd seen before. It was too steady. No flicker, no pulse, just a calm, low glow spread across that patch of sky. I stood up straighter. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of transformer explosion lighting the clouds, but there was no sound, no smoke, no flicker, and the glow wasn't positioned anywhere near the power station. It looked higher than that, much higher. I walked into the yard for a better view. The air felt weirdly still, warm but still, like everything was waiting for something. The crickets had stopped. Dogs weren't barking anymore either. The glow shifted slightly, not in brightness, but in shape, stretching along the underside of the clouds like something was drifting inside them. A slow, deliberate movement, not wind. The rest of the clouds weren't moving at the same speed or direction. I narrowed my eyes, trying to see if something solid was behind the light, but the clouds were too thick. Whatever was causing the glow was hidden inside or above them. For a second, I thought I saw a darker shape within the glowing area, something rounded, maybe a curve. It wasn't clear enough to make out, but it felt intentional, like something very large moved beneath the surface of the clouds. I realized then that the neighborhood had gone completely quiet. No insects, no distant cars, no rustling leaves, just the faint hum of my own breathing. The blue glow shifted again, this time contracting, pulling inward like a tightening circle. The movement wasn't natural. It was too controlled, too smooth. Clouds don't behave that precisely. I whispered, "What is that?" to no one. Right at that moment, the glow dimmed, slowly at first, then abruptly, as if someone had lowered a switch. The last fragment of blue faded into the darkness, and just as it disappeared completely, the power came back on. Every porch light, street lamp, and living room window flared to life at once. My house lit up behind me. The sudden brightness made the yard feel smaller, almost claustrophobic after all that darkness. I blinked hard, adjusting. The air felt lighter now, the heaviness gone. Crickets started chirping again. A dog barked down the street like it had been interrupted mid-sleep. The clouds looked normal, just gray patches floating across the night sky. I turned around and saw Carl stepping outside again, probably wondering why all the lights came back at once. He didn't mention anything unusual. Didn't say he saw the glow. Judging by the way he glanced around casually, he definitely hadn't. I didn't bring it up. I went inside, locked the door, and stood by the front window, looking out at the spot in the sky where the glow had been. Nothing seemed strange about it now. Just a regular night sky over a regular neighborhood. But when I checked my phone, the time caught me off guard. It was 9:43 p.m. I could have sworn only 10 or 15 minutes had passed since the blackout started, but the timestamp on my text messages said I'd lost almost half an hour. I didn't remember standing outside that long. I chalked it up to losing track of time, until I walked back into the kitchen and saw the microwave display blinking 12. That wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was the faint blue reflection on the stainless steel door, just a smear of pale color that vanished as soon as I stepped between it and the window. I first heard the sound just after midnight. I'd been lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, trying to wind down after a long day. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet you get in older neighborhoods where most people go to bed early and the closest highway is miles away. I live in a small 2-bedroom place in the outskirts of Eugene. Nothing fancy, just an old rental with creaky floors and thin windows. At first, I thought the noise was coming from the heater. It was a low hum, steady and smooth. Not mechanical in the normal sense. More like the vibration you feel when a big truck idles nearby, but softer, deeper, and not something I could pinpoint to any appliance. I put my phone down and sat up. The hum didn't fluctuate, it didn't click or buzz or do anything that would make sense for a household system. It just pulsed gently through the air, too even to be anything inside the house. After a few seconds, I realized something was off. The vibration wasn't coming through the floor or walls. It felt like it was pressing downward from above, as if the ceiling itself was humming. I got out of bed and stood in the middle of the room. The sound didn't get louder or softer when I moved. It just hung there, everywhere and nowhere. I walked down the hallway, passing the bathroom and the spare room. The hum stayed the same no matter where I went. I put my ear against the wall. Nothing. I pressed my hand against the floor. Nothing. The vibration wasn't inside the structure at all. It was above it. I went to the living room and turned off the lamp to listen better. The hum was faint but impossible to ignore. A low, dense tone that seemed to sit just below the threshold of normal hearing. It vibrated in my chest more than in my ears. I checked the microwave clock. 12:24 a.m. I didn't know why, but something made me check my phone too. 12:19 a.m. I stared at the two clocks for several seconds before I even processed what I was seeing. The microwave clock tends to drift a little, but not 5 minutes, and not backward or forward in sudden jumps. I tapped the phone screen again to refresh it. Still 12:19. The hum pressed a little harder then, or maybe my nerves made it feel that way. I walked to the front door and put my hand on the knob, half expecting the vibration to be warm or electric. It wasn't. It felt normal. The moment I opened the door, the hum stopped. Instantly. Not faded, not dialed down, just cut off like someone snapped their fingers. The silence outside hit me in a way that made the hair on my arms lift. The street was dead quiet. No cars, no wind, not even the distant hum of the transformer at the end of the block. It was as if every background noise in the neighborhood had been muted. I stepped onto the porch and looked up. The sky was cloudy, thick, uniform clouds reflecting that orange glow you get from city lights bouncing off them. Nothing moved. No gaps, no shifting shapes, no planes, just a still blank ceiling of clouds. But something felt wrong. It wasn't visual. It was like the air above the house had a weight to it that the rest of the street didn't. I walked down the steps into the front yard, trying to get a wider view. The grass was cold under my bare feet. I glanced around at the neighboring houses, two of them dark, one with a porch light on. Nothing unusual. I tilted my head again, staring up at the cloud cover. I kept expecting to hear the hum return or see something slip between the clouds, but the sky stayed motionless. Then the insects stopped. That was the moment I realized how unnaturally quiet everything had become. Usually, even at night, there are crickets or those faint chirps from whatever lives in the shrubs, but the whole block was silent now in a way I'd never heard before. I turned around to look at my house. It looked normal. Porch light glowing, windows dark, but the air above it felt thicker, denser, like heat haze without the heat. A soft, momentary dip in pressure made my ears pop. Not like altitude change, more like walking into a room that's been sealed too long. I froze. 5 or 6 seconds passed where nothing happened. The world stayed completely still, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. Then the hum returned, but not fully. It was faint, distant, like something moving farther away overhead. I looked up and scanned the clouds again. No shapes, no glowing, no shadows, but the hum drifted for a moment, left to right, then slightly behind me, before fading completely. This time it didn't stop abruptly. It thinned out, dissolving into the quiet, until I wasn't sure if I was imagining the last trace of it. When I finally stepped back inside, the house felt warmer, almost too warm. I checked the thermostat, normal. I checked the microwave clock again, 12:29 a.m., and my phone, 12:23. I didn't know which one to trust. I just stood in the kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum, the only normal sound in the world right then. I walked room to room, checking windows, touching walls, listening for any vibration. Everything felt normal again. No lingering hum, no weird pressure, no shifting sounds. But when I lay back down in bed, the quiet felt wrong in a new way, like the house was waiting. I eventually fell asleep, but lightly, the kind where every creak jolts you awake. Around 3:40 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not from a noise, but from the lack of one. I sat up and listened. No hum, no silence shift, no pressure change, just nothing. The next morning, both clocks were synced again, down to the minute. I didn't touch either of them. But that night, before I went to bed, I paused at the front door and listened carefully to the ceiling above me, half expecting that low hum to return, pressing down through the roof. It didn't. But the air felt heavier than normal, like something had passed close by and might again. The power went out sometime after 11. I was home alone in my rental outside of Bend, sitting on the couch with a mug of tea and half watching some old documentary when everything just clicked off. Lights, TV, heater, all of it. The house fell into that thick kind of darkness you only get in rural neighborhoods, where there aren't many streetlights to fill in the gaps. I waited a few seconds, assuming it'd flick back on, but nothing happened. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. The houses across the road were dark too. Even the traffic light at the intersection a block away was dead. No hum of appliances, no glow from windows, just complete silence except for distant wind. The sky was cloudy, but I could still make out the outline of the treetops. Everything had this strange, muted feel, like the night was thicker than usual. I grabbed my phone, but my service indicator was down to one flickering bar. Data wouldn't load. I checked the power company's outage map, but the page kept timing out. I decided to step outside for some air and see if any neighbors were out too. Sometimes people gather on porches during outages, even if they don't talk to each other. It's that weird instinct to take stock together. But the street was empty. No car headlights approaching. No dogs barking. Nothing moving. I leaned against the railing and looked up. That's when I saw it. A patch of clouds almost directly overhead had this faint blue glow behind them. Not lightning blue and not bright, more like the gentle backlight of a monitor. It didn't pulse or flicker, it just held steady, lighting up that one section of sky. It wasn't spreading, it wasn't fading in or out, it was too controlled, too contained. At first, I thought maybe a transformer had blown somewhere near the edge of town and the light was bouncing off the cloud layer. But transformers flash bright and fast. This was soft, sustained, calm, in a way that didn't match anything natural. It was maybe the size of 2 football fields, this perfect bluish halo diffusing through the clouds. The edges were clean, not sharp but intentional, like a light shining through frosted glass. I stepped further into the yard, craning my neck, trying to find a source. But the glow was coming from above the clouds, not beneath them. If something was underneath, I should have seen silhouettes or beams or at least some structure. But there was nothing. Just a bright patch in an otherwise dark sky. I don't know how long I stared. It could have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. It felt suspended, like time wasn't moving quite right. The air was cold enough to sting my nose, but I barely registered it. Something shifted, not the light, not the clouds. Just the atmosphere around me, like the air pressure dipped. My ears popped slightly, and the hair on my arms rose under my jacket. The clouds around the glow started drifting faster, even though the trees weren't moving. They slid across the sky in this smooth horizontal glide, too gentle to be pushed by wind. More like they were making space. The glow brightened just a touch. Barely noticeable, but clear enough that I took a step back without meaning to. Then the sound started. Not a real sound. More like the hint of one. A faint vibration, as if a tone was being played at a frequency just outside what I could fully hear. It settled in my chest more than my ears, a subtle resonance that came and went in soft waves. I felt suddenly exposed standing there in the open yard. That's when the glow started to fade. Not quickly and not unevenly. It dimmed with this strange precision, like someone was turning down a dial. The blue softened to gray, then to nothing, leaving just the normal cloud cover behind. The instant the glow disappeared, the entire neighborhood clicked back to life. Streetlights, porch lights, the low hum of electricity coming back online. The timing wasn't just close, it was exact. The moment the last trace of the glow vanished, the power returned. The porch light above me buzzed and snapped on, washing the yard in a warm yellow that made everything feel suddenly artificial. I blinked against it and backed up onto the steps. Inside, my appliances were rebooting, the heater kicking on, the Wi-Fi router blinking its sequence. My phone buzzed with missed notifications that had failed to send earlier. But something small and strange caught my eye. The stovetop clock, which always reset to 12 after outages, was now flashing 1:18. My phone said 1:12, 6 minutes off. It wasn't much, but it bothered me, especially because I couldn't account for those 6 minutes. I hadn't been outside that long. I tried to chalk it up to the power company's internal timing resetting weirdly, but later when I checked the microwave and the coffee maker, both showed 1:18:2. Everything in the kitchen agreed on a time that didn't match any other clock in the house. I stayed up another hour, pacing, checking outside through the blinds every few minutes. Nothing unusual. The sky was just a normal moonlit gray. No blue, no glow, no vibration in the air. By the time I finally went to bed, I had convinced myself it was some electrical phenomenon mixed with a weird weather reflection. Something explainable. Something boring. Except that when I lay down, the room felt too quiet. Not peaceful. Just expectant. Like the air was listening. I pulled the blankets up, closed my eyes, and tried not to imagine that blue glow returning behind the clouds, or the idea that maybe it hadn't caused the outage at all. Maybe it had been waiting for one. I was driving back from my sister's place in Yakima, late on a Sunday night, taking Highway 12 through the mountains. It was cold enough that the patches of leftover snow along the guardrails looked frozen solid, but the sky was clear and the road was empty. I'd left later than planned, around 10:30 p.m., because we'd gotten caught up talking, and by the time I hit the long stretch near Rimrock Lake, there wasn't another pair of headlights in sight. I had my dash cam running like always. Not because I expected anything, just because I drove that road often enough to know deer like to dart out of nowhere. The hum of the engine mixed with low radio static, no stations came through clearly out there, and the tires made that soft, vibrating sound against the old pavement. I wasn't tired, just settled into that late-night driving headspace where everything feels quieter than it should. Then the flash happened. It was so fast I barely understood what I saw. 1 second the road ahead was the pale gray of my headlights cutting through the dark, and the next it was completely washed out in white. Not like high beams hitting a fog bank. This was clean, pure white, like somebody held a studio strobe directly in front of the car. The dashboard, the windshield, even my hands on the wheel turned paper white for a split second. My first instinct was that a car was cresting a hill, brights on, but there was no glare pattern, no source, no rise in the road where lights could appear. The brightness wasn't directional. It filled the entire windshield at once, edge to edge. Then, it was gone. Just darkness and my headlights again, like nothing had happened. I jerked the wheel slightly from surprise, then corrected. The car handled normally. No sound accompanied the flash. Not even a buzzing or a pop. Just the quiet hum of the engine returning as if the world had paused briefly. My heart was pounding hard enough that I turned the radio down, even though it was barely audible. I kept one eye on the rearview mirror, expecting some kind of headlights behind me. Nothing. Just black. I pulled onto the next turnout, a gravel patch overlooking the lake, and threw the car into park. My breath fogged the interior. I checked the dash cam first. The screen showed the road, frozen mid-frame where the flash happened. I tapped the playback. The recorded footage went from normal night driving to a single pure white frame. No fade in, no fade out, just one fully whited out frame. Then the image returned to normal. But the timestamp jumped. Before the flash. Before the flash, teen. After the flash, 11:45. More than 2 minutes missing. I watched it 3 times, double checking. The dash cam recorded continuously with no gaps and no jumps unless power was cut. But it hadn't powered down. I'd felt no flicker in the dashboard lights, no interruption in the engine. Everything in the car had stayed perfectly steady. I checked the car's digital clock next. It read 11:47 p.m. I could have sworn it was closer to 11:40 when the flash happened. I thought maybe I'd misremembered, so I checked my phone. 11:45 p.m. The car clock was ahead of my phone by 2 minutes. It had never done that before. Both always matched. I'd synced them a week prior. I sat there staring at the phone, trying to piece it together. The dashcam timestamp jumped forward the same amount of time the dash clock had gained. My hands were shaking, but I didn't feel cold. The air inside the car felt heavy, like the pressure had shifted slightly. I turned the engine off and listened. Silence. No wind against the trees, no insects, no distant cars. only the faint ticking of the cooling engine. After maybe 30 seconds, the forest sounds slowly returned. First, a soft rustle in the branches, then the faint crack of settling snow. I wasn't sure whether to drive on or call someone. Calling seemed ridiculous. What would I say? Instead, I got out of the car and walked to the edge of the turnout, looking over the water. Rimrock Lake was pitch black, smooth, barely reflecting the sky. The stars looked normal, bright, steady, nothing unusual. No lingering glow, no aircraft or satellites passing overhead. But something felt wrong, not fear exactly. More like disorientation, like my brain didn't fully trust what had just happened. I got back in the car and rewound the footage one more time, slowing it frame by frame. The flash frame was completely white. No artifacts, no edges of the windshield, no distortions. Pure uniform white. I let the video continue a few more seconds. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. Right after the flash frame, in the first frame of darkness afterward, there was a faint blur along the tree line. A pale horizontal distortion near the top of the screen. It wasn't a shape, not even a light, just a thin ripple like heat haze. It lasted only one frame, then disappeared. I pulled the camera closer, squinting. In the next frame, everything was perfectly normal again. The more I stared, the worse I felt. Like I was making connections I shouldn't. Eventually, I turned the dash cam off completely. My hands didn't stop shaking until I gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles hurt. When I pulled back onto the highway, the car clock still read 2 minutes ahead. I tried resetting it manually. It wouldn't change. The minute number blinked and returned to 11:52. My phone clock kept ticking normally, perfectly in sync with the network time. I drove slower than usual, every mile feeling stretched. A few times, the sky seemed a little lighter in my peripheral vision, the same way it does before dawn, but when I glanced up, it was pitch black again. Nothing moving, nothing shining, just the same endless mountain road. About 20 minutes later, somewhere near the Oak Creek turnoff, the car clock corrected itself. It didn't rewind, it didn't jump. It just flickered once and synced perfectly with my phone. I stared at the display so long I drifted slightly over the center line. By the time I reached town, the dash cam had powered itself back on without me touching it. I didn't notice until I pulled into my driveway. The screen was glowing faintly, cycling through its usual standby mode. I watched the time. It matched the car clock. When I reviewed the saved clips, the footage was intact up to the flash, and then skipped straight to the point after it. The dash cam had kept the timestamp jump, but didn't show the missing minutes. The white frame was still there, but everything in between was gone. In the morning, I checked again, hoping maybe sleep would make it look different or less strange. It didn't. The flash was still perfect white. The timestamp still jumped, and the single frame after it still had that faint ripple in the tree line that I couldn't explain no matter how long I stared at it. When I stepped outside to clear my head, the driveway felt normal. The sky was bright. The mountains looked ordinary. But every time I thought about the moment the road went white, my stomach tightened. The dash cam never glitched again. Neither did the car clock. But I stopped taking Highway 12 at night after that. Even if I couldn't explain what had happened, the memory of how silent the forest became during those missing minutes stayed sharp enough that I didn't want to give that stretch of road another chance. I was staying at my cousin Rachel's cabin near Bishop, California, helping her with some repairs after a heavy windstorm. She'd bought the place a few years earlier, but didn't visit much. And half the time, I think she just used me as free labor with the promise of quiet weekends in the mountains. I didn't mind. The cabin sat on a wide stretch of land dotted with sagebrush, with a clear view of the night sky that felt unreal compared to the light-polluted town I lived in. The night everything happened, Rachel had already gone to bed. She'd been exhausted from cleaning out the shed, and I'd stayed up because the weather was perfect, cool, crisp, not a cloud anywhere. I pulled a camp chair out onto the patch of dirt behind the cabin and tipped it back, watching the sky the way I used to when I was a kid. No phone, no music, just stars. I don't stargaze often, so half of what I noticed felt new, even if it wasn't. The Milky Way was better defined than I'd ever seen it. There were faint streaks from what I assumed were satellites, the occasional plane crossing way off in the distance, all normal things. I don't remember when I first noticed the darker patch. At first, I assumed it was just my eyes adjusting, the way your vision shifts when you look too long at the same thing. But it didn't behave like that. The stars in that one spot weren't dim, they were gone. Just a small oval area where nothing shone through. I leaned forward in the chair, trying to shake off the after-image idea. But the patch stayed exactly where it was, oval-shaped with edges that looked too clean for a cloud, maybe the size of my thumb held at arm's length. I watched it for a moment, waiting for movement. Clouds drift, planes move in straight lines. Even birds at night have some kind of path. This thing just hovered. I stood up without even meaning to. The sky felt suddenly too close. After maybe 20 seconds, the oval shifted. Not downwind, there was no wind, not diagonally like a bird. It moved in a slow, steady line from left to right, the way a cursor slides across a screen when someone drags it carefully. The stars on one side reappeared as it left the area. The stars on the other side disappeared under it. Perfectly smooth motion. I kept waiting for the outline to sharpen or blur or distort, like something that would anchor it as a real object with real distance. But it didn't do any of that. Its edges stayed clean, unnatural, like the sky itself had been edited. I glanced toward the cabin, thinking maybe I should wake Rachel, but something about calling her felt wrong, or maybe I didn't want to take my eyes off it. The oval continued sliding until it reached almost the midpoint of the sky above me. It slowed, then stopped again, holding perfectly still. The silence around me deepened, not in a dramatic way, not like everything cut off at once, but enough that I noticed fewer crickets, fewer rustles in the brush. It was as if the whole area eased into a quieter gear without me realizing it. Then the air got colder. Not by much, but enough to make me feel like I'd stepped into shade even though I hadn't moved. I thought about going inside, but I stayed. Some part of me needed to see what it would do next. After a minute, maybe less, the oval started moving again, but this time the motion was different. Instead of sliding horizontally, it drifted upward, slow, steady, without acceleration. The stars it had blocked returned, one by one, crisp and without distortion. It reminded me of watching something submerged rise through water, except there was no distortion around it, no warping, no shimmer, just a hole in the sky moving higher. About halfway up, it paused again. Then it tilted. At least that's the only way I can describe it. The oval shape shifted slightly, not rotating like a disc, but changing its angle relative to me. It made no sound. It didn't glow or reflect anything. It just adjusted itself. And then it continued rising, faster than before. Still smooth, still silent, but definitely faster. The shape got smaller as it went up, shrinking into the sky until it wasn't blocking anything. Then it became a single dark pinpoint. That pinpoint flickered once. Then it was gone. Not faded, not blurred out, just gone. I stood there for several seconds, waiting to see if a plane or satellite would cross through the same area. Something to compare it with. Nothing did. The crickets picked back up gradually. The coldness in the air receded. I felt like I had stepped out of something without realizing I'd ever stepped into it. After a minute or two, I finally convinced myself to go inside. I locked the cabin door, even though it didn't seem like that would matter for anything that could blot out part of the sky. Rachel was asleep on the pull-out couch, breathing slow and steady. I didn't wake her, but I lay awake on the top bunk for hours, staring at the ceiling, aware of every tiny sound of the cabin settling. At one point, I got up and checked through the blinds toward the back of the house. The sky looked normal. In the morning, Rachel asked if I'd stayed up late and joked about me getting too old for outdoor insomnia. I laughed it off. I didn't tell her about the oval. I didn't tell anyone. But for the rest of the trip, I avoided going outside after dark. Even when the stars looked perfect again, I couldn't bring myself to sit in the same chair and stare up. Because every time I closed my eyes, even days later, I could still picture that exact shape. Not a shadow, not a cloud, not anything I recognized. Just a clean, dark oval drifting across a sky full of stars, like something blocking out whatever was behind it, and moving with purpose. I was standing in my backyard a little after 9, mostly just killing time while my dog Luna sniffed every patch of grass like she'd never been outside before. It had rained earlier, one of those short evening showers that leaves everything damp but doesn't cool anything off. The air smelled muddy and warm. Clouds were moving fast overhead, thin, patchy ones catching bits of moonlight in different places. Nothing felt strange at first. It was just another humid night in a small neighborhood outside Canaville. Quiet except for the usual bugs, a distant AC unit, and the occasional car passing the main road. Then my ears popped. Not both at once, just the left one first, then the right, like someone pressing lightly on the sides of my head. It wasn't painful, just sharp and sudden enough to make me stop walking. I swallowed, trying to equalize them the way you do on an airplane, but the pressure didn't settle immediately. It clung there for a few seconds, buzzing faintly behind the eardrum. I looked around without knowing why. It wasn't instinct exactly, more like the atmosphere around me had shifted in a way my body reacted to before my brain could catch up. Luna froze too, halfway through lifting her leg on the cherry tree. Her ears went rigid. The cricket stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't bright. If anything, it was weaker than a star, but bigger. A little sphere of pale white drifting between the clouds, moving at a slow, steady pace. At first, I thought it was a plane caught behind the wispy layers, but there was no blink, no red or green navigation light, no sound. It made no sense how quiet it was. Normally, when it's that still out, you can hear a jet miles away. This thing was silent. Luna whimpered, low and uncertain, and stayed glued to my leg. She almost never does that. She's usually too focused on marking the entire property as hers. The light slid out from behind one cloud and into a clear patch. That's when I realized it wasn't as far away as I first assumed. The size was wrong. Too big to be a star, too defined to be a planet, too small to be anything I'd expect to see that low in the sky. It looked like it was maybe a few hundred feet up. Hard to tell, but it wasn't space high. I held my breath without meaning to. The pressure in my ears faded, but the silence didn't. The light dipped slightly, like it was adjusting its path. Not wobbling like a balloon, not curving like a drone, just a soft, deliberate change in direction. Then it moved laterally, cutting across the sky in a smooth arc that didn't match the wind direction at all. I checked the treetops. Barely any movement. The clouds above were moving west. The light drifted east. I didn't move. I felt like if I blinked, it would disappear. It drifted behind another cluster of clouds, dimming as the foggy layers passed over it. I waited for it to emerge on the other side. It didn't. I kept staring, counting seconds, trying to predict where it should have come out. 5 seconds. 10, 20. Nothing. Then the silence broke. Not with sound, but with the lack of something. The air felt thinner suddenly, like the humidity had been sucked out of it. Luna backed up until she hit the sliding door and scratched at it, whining now. I finally stepped backward too because the pressure in my ears came back again, this time gentler, like I was adjusting altitude. The sky looked normal now, just clouds moving fast, moonlight cutting through the gaps, the faint orange glow of town hanging beneath everything. But the moment felt wrong, like something had passed through and left the atmosphere settling behind it. I let Luna inside and stepped in after her, leaving the door open just a crack. Part of me wanted to shut it immediately, but the other part felt weirdly drawn to keep watching outside. I turned off the kitchen light so the reflection wouldn't block my view. The crickets hadn't come back yet. The silence in their place felt too heavy. I watched the sky for a good 2 minutes, waiting for the light to reappear. Nothing happened. The pressure in my ears faded again, slowly this time, like easing out of a deep tunnel. I told myself it could have been anything. A drone with its lights diffused through the moisture, a helicopter moving away silently, the moon reflecting weird off wind-blown mist. But none of those explanations matched the way it moved, or the way the air reacted, or the way the animals went quiet all at once. I closed the sliding door and locked it. I almost never lock it until I go to bed. As I walked through the living room, I felt something shift in the house, like a faint tremor. Just one subtle vibration through the floorboards, not enough to rattle anything, but noticeable enough that I stopped walking. It didn't repeat. Luna didn't react. That made it even stranger. I checked the time on the stove, 9:14 p.m. Then I glanced at the microwave, 9:11. My phone said 9:12. The clocks weren't far apart, but they never disagreed. Not by minutes. And they weren't wrong earlier. I'd checked the stove clock when I started making dinner around 7. Everything had matched then. I didn't try to fix them. Something about adjusting the clocks felt like admitting something unusual had happened. I went back to the sliding door one more time and peered outside. The crickets had finally started up again, but weakly, like they were testing the air first. A breeze moved through the neighborhood, shaking the branches and rustling the leftover rain off the leaves. Everything looked normal, but the silence from earlier still lingered somewhere in the back of my mind like an imprint. So did the memory of that small floating light, how it drifted with purpose, how it vanished in the middle of open sky, and how the entire environment seemed to respond to it in ways I didn't have words for. I didn't stay up waiting for it to return. I went to bed. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faint glow moving between the clouds. Too deliberate, too silent, too aware. And every now and then, on completely ordinary nights, my ears pop the same way. And for a few seconds, the world around me holds its breath again. The horizon started glowing way too early. That's what kicked everything off. I was out behind my cousin Daniel's cabin in northern Wisconsin, sitting on an old overturned canoe at the edge of the tree line. I hadn't slept all night, partly because the cot inside was uncomfortable, and partly because I'd had too much cheap gas station coffee on the drive up. It was maybe 4 a.m, still pitch dark except for a sliver of moon, and I was just waiting for something like tiredness to finally hit me. Instead, the eastern horizon brightened. At first I thought I'd lost track of time and dawn was coming early, but it didn't look right. The light didn't spread out the way sunrise normally does. It was all concentrated in one narrow band, like someone had turned on a giant floodlight just beyond the tree line. Everything went this washed-out pale yellow, and I remember thinking it looked artificial somehow, even though I couldn't explain why. The glow stayed there, hovering low and steady, and the birds didn't make a sound. Usually they start chirping even before the first bit of dawn, but the whole forest was dead quiet. Even the mosquitoes had stopped whining around my ears. I stood up from the canoe, half expecting a truck or something to come driving over the ridge, but the light didn't behave like headlights. It wasn't moving, it wasn't shifting or fading out, it was just fixed. Then it started to contract. Not dimming, contracting. Pulling upward, almost like someone was rolling the horizon upward into the sky. The light thinned into a narrow column, lifting straight up until it was nothing but a pale pinpoint overhead, and then it disappeared completely. I just stood there for a long minute, trying to process what I'd seen. I kept replaying it in my head, comparing it to things that made sense. Meteors, planes, reflections, distant buildings, but nothing fit. There were no towns in that direction, no roads with big lights, no factories. Just miles and miles of forest. When the sounds came back, they came back all at once. A woodpecker hammered somewhere to my left. The mosquitoes returned like they'd been waiting for a cue, and a wind picked up out of nowhere, cold enough to sting. I told myself I was overtired and imagining things. It wasn't a good explanation, but it was the only one that didn't involve me turning around and heading home in the dark like a scared kid. I went inside the cabin, made instant oatmeal, and tried not to keep checking the horizon every few seconds. Daniel wasn't supposed to show up until the next afternoon, and I didn't want to text him something vague like, "The sky folded upward this morning." He'd just think I was screwing with him. By late morning, I'd convinced myself I'd exaggerated the whole thing. Lack of sleep can do weird stuff. Maybe I'd nodded off and dreamed the part where the light moved. That seemed like the safest interpretation. But when I stepped outside around noon to chop kindling, I noticed the air felt wrong. Not hot or cold, just thick, like the pressure had changed. I kept yawning, trying to pop my ears, but it didn't help. That feeling stuck around the entire afternoon. Around 4, I walked down to the lake with my fishing rod, mostly out of habit. The lake was calm, no boats or noise. I cast a few times and tried to relax, but every ripple on the water caught my attention. Every little rustle in the trees made my shoulders tense. I kept checking the treetops across the lake, expecting, I don't know what, something. I was halfway through reeling in when the air pressure dropped again. Not gradually, fast, like someone had opened a huge vacuum above the tree line. My ears popped hard enough to ache. The water went still, totally flat, like a sheet of glass. Then the light came back. Not on the horizon this time. This time it appeared straight overhead, faint but noticeable, like a soft white blur behind invisible clouds. It drifted slowly in a line across the lake, moving far too smoothly to be an aircraft. No sound, no blinking, no trail, just a pale smear gliding from one edge of the sky to the other. I stood up and backed toward shore without meaning to. The rod hung limp in my hands. The light kept drifting until it reached the far tree line where it paused. Not slowed, paused, like it was considering something. Then it contracted again, upward, a thin vertical line shrinking toward a single point until it vanished. When it was gone, the pressure snapped back to normal. The water rippled from a sudden breeze. Birds cried out again. Everything returned instantly, like someone had lifted a mute button. I didn't stay by the lake after that. I packed up and went back to the cabin, trying not to walk too fast. Inside, I checked my phone. It was on, but the clock was wrong. Not by much, maybe 10 minutes, but it was behind, even though the battery hadn't died. I reset it, shrugged it off. I spent the rest of the evening inside, reading to distract myself. By the time it got dark, the wind had picked up and the cabin creaked a little with each gust. I checked the windows more than necessary. Around midnight, the pressure changed again. I was lying on the cot, half asleep, when the room tightened around me. My ears popped. My skin prickled like the air had turned dense and electric. I sat up, expecting thunder or lightning, but the night was completely clear. I went to the window. Nothing outside was moving. Not the branches, not the grass, not the insects. It felt like the entire world had been put on pause. Then, through the treetops to the east, I saw a faint glow rising upward. Very faint, barely visible, but rising in that same contracting motion as before. Not spreading, not illuminating anything around it, just pulling upward until it vanished. The instant it disappeared, a gust of wind slammed against the cabin so hard it rattled the hinges. My ears popped again, and then everything returned to normal. Crickets, rustling leaves, distant night sounds. I sat there long after the wind died, staring at the dark treetops and trying to slow down my breathing. I didn't open the door. I didn't step outside. I didn't even turn off the lamp. I just sat there until the sun finally started coming up for real. The real sunrise looked the way it always did, soft and gradual, spreading outward the way light should. When Daniel arrived later that day, I didn't tell him much, just that I hadn't slept well and the woods felt off. He laughed and said the place always felt weird before storms, even though there were no storms in the forecast. I didn't argue. I doubt I could have explained what I saw in a way that made sense. Even now, I don't know how to describe it without feeling like I'm leaving something out. I just know the horizon shouldn't brighten like that, and light shouldn't move upward. I woke up exactly at 3:11 a.m., not because of a noise or a dream, but because I had the sudden, overwhelming feeling that someone had been standing in my room. Not was standing there. Had been. Like that sensation when someone leaves a space a second before you walk into it and the air hasn't settled yet. I didn't bolt upright or anything. I just lay there, eyes open in the dark, trying to understand what felt off. The house was completely quiet. My place sits on the edge of a small town in Maine. 2 bedrooms, old wooden floors that creak if you breathe too hard. Normally, if my cat walks across the hallway, I hear it. But the house was absolutely still. I don't know how long I lay like that before I reached over and checked my phone. 3:11. No notifications. No alerts. Just that time glowing back at me in a way that made the silence feel heavier. My eyes adjusted enough to make out the shapes of the furniture. Everything looked normal. The chair in the corner, the dresser, the open doorway leading to the hall. I didn't see anything or anyone, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It sat behind my ribs, tight and certain. Someone was here. I sat up slowly. The sheets felt cool, the air in the room even cooler against my arms. I looked around again, this time more carefully. That's when I noticed the window. It's an old double-hung window facing the backyard, the kind with glass that rattles slightly when the wind hits it right. Except there was no wind that night. The trees outside were still. The sky had been cloudy earlier, and the street lamp glow normally seeped through, but now the glass looked darker than usual. I reached out and touched it. The glass was warm, not hot, not like a heater, just gently warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, which made no sense, obviously. I kept my hand on it a moment, confused. The warmth was strongest near the center and faded toward the edges. I even touched the wooden frame to compare, and the frame was cold like everything else in the room. I remember whispering out loud, "What the hell?" But even my voice sounded wrong, too loud in the quiet. I pulled the blinds up a few inches and peered into the backyard. Nothing was moving. My yard is small, fenced on two sides, with a patch of grass that never grows right and an old maple tree that leans too much. The security light from the neighbor's garage cast just enough glow to make everything seem washed out. No animals, no footprints, no fog, no shadows, just a still, ordinary backyard. But the glass was warm. I let the blinds drop and stepped back. A faint hum vibrated through my ears for a second, not in the room, but inside my head, like the leftover ringing after hearing something loud, except I hadn't heard anything. I walked into the hallway, half expecting to hear floorboards shifting or something brushing against the walls. Nothing. The house felt empty in a way I'd never noticed before. In the kitchen, the digital clock on the stove was off. The microwave, too. Both had reset, blinking 12, even though the rest of the power seemed fine. The fridge was humming. The overhead light worked when I flipped it on. My phone still had service. Only those two appliances had restarted. Power flickers aren't unusual around here, especially after storms, but the weather had been calm all night. No rain, no wind, no thunder. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The air outside felt wrong. Not cold, not warm, but thin. That's the only word I can think of. Like the space around me had been stretched a little too far. The sky was overcast, but the clouds seemed lower than usual, like a ceiling I could almost reach. And the silence wasn't just quiet, it was vacant. No insects, no distant cars on the main road, no rustling branches. Then a sound came from above me, a soft, fading whoosh. Not mechanical, not wind, more like something exhaling as it moved away. I tilted my head back instinctively, but the clouds hid everything. I stood there waiting, listening, trying to figure out where the sound had gone. It didn't repeat, it didn't come closer. It was just gone, leaving only static silence behind. I stayed outside longer than I should have, staring at the sky like an answer might appear. Eventually the silence got to me. I stepped back into the house and locked the door, even though I knew a lock wouldn't matter if whatever had warmed the glass had actually been inside. Back in the bedroom, the window had cooled down. I checked with my hand. Completely normal temperature. I sat on the edge of the bed, too awake to try sleeping again. My cat, Milo, usually sleeps at my feet, but that night he was hiding under the bed, pressed so far into the corner I could barely reach him. When I called his name softly, he didn't come out. His eyes were wide, pupils huge. Around 4 a.m., the normal sounds of the house started up again. A breeze rattled the eaves. A distant car passed down the hill. Milo crawled out from under the bed and acted like nothing had happened. By the time the sun came up, I started questioning myself. Maybe I'd dreamed most of it. Maybe the power really did flicker and I imagined the rest. Maybe the warm glass was just temperature difference somehow. But then I walked past the window again. There were faint smudge marks on the inside of the glass. Not fingerprints. Long, curved streaks, like something had pressed lightly against it and dragged downward. Too broad for hands, too smooth for fabric. I wiped them off without thinking, then immediately regretted doing it. Nothing strange happened the rest of the day. Nothing the next night either. I kept checking the window, but the glass stayed cold, ordinary, forgettable. It's been weeks now, and life has mostly returned to normal. But sometimes when I'm half asleep and roll over in the dark, I get that same sudden certainty that someone was standing in the room watching me breathe. And every time that happens, I reach for the window glass, just to make sure it's still cold. I noticed the glow when I was halfway down the driveway with the trash bag dragging against my leg. It was around 9:30 at night, early January, cold enough that the air felt stiff in my nose. My neighborhood in Cedar Falls is pretty quiet after dark. Dim porch lights, the occasional dog bark, nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't even looking at anything, just trying to get the chore done so I could go back inside. Then something bright enough to register in my peripheral vision made me stop. A soft white glow sat on the roof of the Jensen house across the street. At first, I thought it was just their porch light reflecting off frost, but the angle was wrong. The glow looked like it was resting on the shingles, like a puddle of light, except on top of the house. It was flat and still, maybe 5 feet wide, too bright to be moonlight, but not bright enough to cast shadows. I stood there holding the trash bag, staring. My eyes adjusted, but the glow didn't change. It didn't waver or blink or respond to anything. It just sat there, this clean pool of white light with no source. After a moment, I took a few slow steps toward the curb. The glow didn't react, but something in the air did. The neighborhood soundscape, distant traffic, a generator hum from a couple blocks over, felt like it dulled slightly. Not silent, just muffled, like someone turned down the world. I kept moving forward. The closer I got, the more I realized how wrong the glow looked. It didn't reflect off the edges of the roof. It didn't tint the gutters. It didn't behave like light at all. More like someone had laid a flat white shape onto the rooftop and given it a faint pulse of brightness. I crossed the street without really thinking about why. When I stepped onto the pavement on their side, the glow vanished. Instantly. No fading, no dimming, just gone. The roof went back to being an ordinary outline under the street lamp, with frost sparkling on the shingles. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Nothing. I backed up a step, half expecting it to reappear. Nothing. I stood there for at least a minute, maybe longer, trying to decide what I'd actually seen. I finally turned around to head home, but halfway back across the street, the neighborhood fell into that same muffled quiet again. I stopped walking. No breeze, no distant cars, no dog collar jingling next door. Just that soft, padded silence you get in heavy snow, even though it wasn't snowing. I turned back to the Jensen house. The glow wasn't there, but something about the darkness around their roof felt dense, like it was trying too hard to look normal. The shape of the roofline looked too simple, like someone had redrawn it with fewer details. My chest tightened. I took a careful step backward. A flicker appeared above the house. Not a glow, just a quick, pale shimmer, the way light looks when it reflects off metal far away. Except nothing metal was up there. Just shingles, cold air, and the faint haze from someone's chimney a block over. The shimmer stretched horizontally for a split second and then snapped inward, disappearing like someone had pinched it closed. My hands felt numb, and not from the cold. I wanted to go inside immediately, but curiosity pinned me in place. I stared at the rooftop, waiting. A few seconds passed, then a faint crackling noise drifted down. Soft, irregular, almost like static, but more organic. It reminded me of ice shifting on a lake, only quieter and somehow closer. I stepped onto the curb again. The crackling stopped instantly. The normal nighttime sounds came rushing back. An engine revving in the distance, wind moving a frozen bush in the Jensen yard, a dog's nails tapping on someone's hardwood floor inside a house down the block. I turned and walked quickly back to my driveway, a tightness in my throat I couldn't swallow away. I dropped the trash bag into the bin and stood still for a moment, listening. Everything seemed normal again. When I reached my front door, I checked over my shoulder one more time. The roof across the street looked perfectly dark and ordinary. I went inside, locked the door, and pulled the blinds without thinking. About 20 minutes later, curiosity won out, and I peeked out through a narrow gap. The Jensen house was still dark, no glow on the roof, but my porch light flickered once, sharp, quick, like it blinked. The bulb was new. My phone buzzed on the counter. I walked over and checked it. No notification, no missed call, no alert, just a timestamp I didn't recognize on the lock screen. 9:41 p.m., even though the clock at the top said 9:38. When I tapped the screen, the 9:41 disappeared. I stood there with the phone in my hand, staring at the blank lock screen reflection of my own face. My pulse was loud in my ears. I didn't look outside again for the rest of the night. But the next morning, when I went out to my car, I noticed something odd. A faint dusting of white powder on my windshield. Not frost, not pollen, something finer, almost like chalk dust. Only on my car, not on the driveway, not on the trash bin, nowhere else. I brushed it off with my sleeve, and it smeared into nothing. I checked the roof across the street. Normal. But as I backed out of the driveway, something made me stop at the curb. I looked up at the Jensen house one more time. For just a second. Less than that, really. A soft white glow formed at the corner of the roofline. A tiny patch, like a test spot, almost hesitant. It flickered once and dissolved before I could fully focus on it. Then the normal morning light took over. That was it. Since then, every time I take the trash out after dark, I catch myself watching the rooftops more than the ground, checking for shapes or pools of brightness that shouldn't exist. So far, nothing has happened again. But sometimes the air gets that same muffled quality for a moment, and I freeze, waiting to see if the light will reappear before I take another step. I noticed the first porch light go out when I was halfway up Alder Street. It was a chilly March night, clear enough that you could see the thin clouds drifting over the neighborhood, but cold enough that I had my hands shoved into the pockets of my hoodie. I'd stayed late at my friend Mason's place watching some documentary he wanted me to see, and by the time I started heading home, it was close to 1 a.m. The streets in our neighborhood were always dead at that hour. Just rows of single-story houses, parked cars, and the occasional cat slipping between yards. The lights along Alder weren't fancy, just those small yellow porch bulbs people leave on so their front steps aren't pitch black. The first one, the house with the trimmed hedges and the busted mailbox, flickered once. I thought maybe the bulb was dying. Then it clicked off completely. I kept walking, not thinking much of it, until the next house's porch light flickered too. Then it went out. One house down, same thing. A flutter of dim yellow, then darkness. At first, I honestly thought it was some kind of neighborhood power dip, but if that were the case, the streetlights should have gone out too. They didn't. They stayed solid and steady, humming the way they always did. Only the porch lights, one after another, switched off as I approached. I slowed down without meaning to. The sound of my footsteps on the sidewalk suddenly felt loud, like the night had thickened around me. I looked behind me, checking if maybe some raccoon or stray dog was triggering motion sensors or something stupid like that, but the houses behind me stayed dark. Nothing was moving. When I turned forward again, the next light in line, 2 houses ahead, blinked and died. I stopped completely. I don't know how long I stood there, listening. The neighborhood was usually quiet, but this was a different kind of quiet. Not peaceful. Just empty. I stepped forward again, more slowly this time, watching the row of houses. As I moved, the lights kept going out exactly in sync with my pace, like I was tripping some invisible switch. But they were too far away for motion sensors, and I wasn't close enough to trigger anything. That was when something shifted overhead. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. More like the air above me thickened for a second. I looked up and saw the clouds sliding past the moon. Nothing unusual at first, just thin gray streaks moving like they always did. Then a darker shape drifted across them. No outline, no steady form, just a faint shadow that didn't match the cloud layer. It moved too smoothly, too deliberately. I stood there with my mouth slightly open, watching it glide from one side of the street to the other. It didn't resemble a plane or helicopter. It didn't blink or glow. It was just darker, a smudge against the sky, with no sound at all. Then it paused. Not visibly, just its movement stopped. The clouds kept drifting, but the shadow held perfectly still. That was enough for me to start walking again, this time a little faster. I didn't want to run yet, because running felt like it would make everything worse somehow, but I needed to get home. As I passed the house with the big elm tree, its porch light flickered violently for a full second before going out. Not a glitch. Not a power issue. It felt timed. Another light blinked off, then another. They were dropping ahead of me like dominoes. I pulled out my phone to text Mason, but the screen didn't wake up. It stayed black. No matter how many times I tapped, swiped, or pressed the buttons, it didn't respond. The battery wasn't dead. I'd charged it before leaving. It was like the whole phone had just stopped being a phone. My chest tightened as I kept walking. I glanced up again, and the shadow in the clouds moved. Not across the sky this time, downward. Just a few feet, barely noticeable, but enough that it made my breath catch. It wasn't lowering fast like something falling. It was controlled, intentional. My heart started pounding so hard I heard it in my ears. I cut across the street to Pine Avenue, trying to break the weird pattern with the porch lights, but the first house I passed there flickered out too. Same slow blink, same soft click, same darkness afterward. I swear I could feel something overhead, some weight or pressure in the air. The kind of feeling you get when you know someone is looking at you, even if you can't see them. I walked faster, not quite running, but close. Halfway down Pine, the last streetlight on the block dimmed. Not fully off, just lowered as if someone had a dial. The dimming spread to the next light, then the next, rolling ahead of me like a wave stretching down the street. The sky went a shade darker. Not from clouds. The clouds actually thinned out enough for me to see more stars. The darkness felt more like something above me was blocking what little light the moon gave off. I finally broke into a jog. The house at the corner of Pine and Willow was mine. Brown siding, lopsided fence, motion light that never worked right. I could see it from halfway up the block, the faint glow of my living room TV flickering inside because I'd left it on for background noise. But the moment I stepped within a certain distance, maybe 30 feet, the porch bulb made a tiny buzzing sound and shut off. The whole front of my house went dark. That was the moment panic finally hit me. I sprinted the last stretch, almost tripping over the uneven concrete near my driveway. I didn't look up again. I didn't need to. The air pressed down on me like a heavy blanket, thick enough that it made my ears feel clogged. I reached the door, grabbed the handle, and nearly dropped my keys trying to unlock it. My hands were shaking hard enough that I had to steady them against the siding. When the door finally swung open, warm air spilled out. I stepped inside and slammed it behind me, locking both deadbolts even though I'd never used the second one before. The instant the door clicked shut, the TV audio faded back in, the refrigerator hum returned, and something outside made a soft popping sound, like a far-off spark. I stood there in the entryway, breathing hard, listening. The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was normal, familiar. After a minute, I forced myself to peek out the small window near the door. All the porch lights on the street were on again. Every single one. No flickering, no delay, just steady yellow glows like nothing had happened. I stayed awake for hours, watching the windows, listening for anything unusual. Nothing happened. The neighborhood went back to being exactly what it always was. A quiet little grid of streets with identical houses and predictable nights. But every time I step outside after dark now, I catch myself looking up at the clouds, checking for anything moving the wrong way. Anything too smooth or too quiet. Anything that pauses when I pause. And sometimes, when I walk home late, I swear I still see the porch lights hesitate before staying lit, just long enough to make me wonder if something is still up there, drifting above the neighborhood, waiting for the right moment to glide across the sky again. I was on my third patrol of the night when the lights showed up. It was just after 2 a.m., the slowest part of the shift. The facility had been shut down for years, but the company still paid for overnight security because of liability and scrap thieves. It sat on the edge of town, surrounded by chain link fence and weeds that had grown taller than the warning signs. Old manufacturing plant. Concrete, metal, empty rooms that still smelled faintly like oil and dust. I'd worked there for almost 2 years. Same route every night, same sounds, same nothing. That night was cold and clear. No wind, the kind of quiet where your own footsteps feel intrusive. I was halfway across the east lot when I noticed a glow behind the main building, low and steady like a floodlight someone had forgotten to shut off. There weren't any working lights back there. I stopped walking and watched it for a few seconds. It didn't move. Didn't flicker. Just sat there, pale white, reflecting off the back wall and the weeds along the fence. I called it in on the radio. No response. Dispatch was probably dealing with drunks downtown. That happened a lot. I didn't go investigate right away. That's not bravery, that's experience. When something's wrong, rushing toward it usually just gives you more problems. After maybe 30 seconds, the light went out. Not like a switch, more like someone pinching it closed. The darkness snapped back into place. I stood there longer than I meant to. Nothing else happened. No sounds. No movement. Eventually, I finished the patrol and went back to the guard shack. I logged it as unidentified light source, duration under 1 minute. That was about as far as I could go without sounding stupid. At 3:18 a.m., there was a knock on the shack door. Nobody ever knocked. If someone needed in, they called ahead or used the keypad. I opened the door partway. Two men stood outside under the overhang, dry despite the frost forming on everything else. Both wore dark coats, thin and plain. One was tall and narrow with a long face and dark hair combed flat. The other was shorter, heavier, with a round face and eyes that didn't quite focus on me. Evening, the tall one said. Or morning, I suppose. I asked how they got past the gate. The shorter one smiled. We didn't. That didn't make sense, and I said so. We're here regarding your report, the tall one said. About the lights. I just logged that, I said. Who are you? They stepped inside without waiting for permission. The shack felt smaller immediately. The shorter one glanced up at the ceiling. Not at the lights, just up, like he was listening through it. The tall one noticed and paused mid-sentence until the shorter man nodded slightly. Then he continued. You observed illumination near the rear structure, he said. Yes. At approximately 2:07 a.m., yes. Did the light move? No. Did it produce sound? No. Did you feel disoriented? No. The shorter man kept glancing upward, every few seconds. Quick looks, like checking a clock only he could see. I asked again who they were. Contracted oversight, the tall one said. For who? He smiled faintly. For continuity. That answer didn't sit right. I noticed then that neither of them had asked for my name, or my ID. They already knew where to find me. They asked me to describe the light again. I did, same as before. The tall one nodded. The shorter one tilted his head, listening to the ceiling again. His lips moved once, silently. Did you observe any personnel? The tall one asked. No. Any vehicles? No. Any missing time? No. The shorter man finally looked at me. That's good. Why? I asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It simplifies things. I crossed my arms. I did my job. If there's nothing else, I've got patrols to finish. The tall one pulled a single sheet of paper from his coat. Just a quick acknowledgement. He set it on the desk between us, along with a pen. The paper had the company letterhead at the top, my name printed neatly beneath it. A statement confirming that I had not observed anything unusual beyond routine environmental lighting. That's not what I saw, I said. It is, he said calmly. In context. I'm not signing that. The shorter man glanced up again, longer this time. His smile tightened, then relaxed. You already did, he said. I laughed once, sharp and nervous. No, I didn't. The tall man turned the paper slightly so I could see the bottom. There was my signature. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was close enough. Same slant. Same loop on the R. Same hesitation at the end of my last name. My stomach dropped. I don't remember signing that, I said. That's expected, the tall one said. I asked when it had been signed. Earlier, he said. Earlier when? The shorter man answered without looking at me. Before you noticed the lights. That made my head feel wrong, like something shifting just out of reach. I told them they needed to leave, that I was calling my supervisor. The tall one nodded. That won't be necessary. The shorter man looked up at the ceiling one last time, then nodded back like he'd gotten confirmation. We're finished, the tall one said. They walked out of the shack together. I followed to the door, watching them cross the lot. They didn't go toward the gate. They walked straight toward the main building, passing into the shadow along its side. I waited for them to come out the other end. They didn't. I didn't see them leave. I didn't hear anything. The rest of the shift passed in a haze. I finished my patrols on autopilot. The facility felt different, not active, just attentive. When my relief arrived at 6 a.m., I went home without saying much. That afternoon, after I'd slept a few hours, I checked the online log system. The signed statement was there. Time-stamped 1:54 a.m. I was on camera at that time, walking the north fence. I didn't file a report about the men. I still work security, just not there anymore. Sometimes, when I'm doing rounds late at night, I catch myself glancing up at ceilings without knowing why. I was stargazing behind my cousin Jonah's cabin the night it happened. He lived out in the hills near Pinedale, Wyoming, where the sky actually looked the way it does in planetarium posters. Huge, sharp, crowded with stars you never see in town. He'd invited a few of us up for the weekend because the Perseid meteor shower was supposed to peak, and he wanted company. I drove up late after work, figuring I'd miss most of the show, but still get a quiet night out of it. By the time I got there, it was close to 11. Jonah and his girlfriend Ariana were already out in the field with blankets and a little speaker playing something low and calm. The weather was clearer than the forecast said it would be, cold but not biting, with the faintest breeze coming down from the ridge. The field behind the cabin sloped gently upward, giving you a wide stretch of open sky. We all lay there on our backs, and I pointing out satellites and the occasional streak of a meteor. It started when I noticed a cluster of stars near Cassiopeia that looked a little off, not brighter or dimmer, just positioned strangely, like one had slipped slightly out of place. I blinked a few times. The stars around it stayed fixed, the constellations perfectly normal, but that one star was drifting. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, sliding sideways along a path that didn't match anything I knew. Not a satellite arc, not a plane, not a shooting star. It looked like a star being nudged on a track. I propped myself onto my elbows, trying to follow its movement. The longer I watched, the more certain I was. This thing was moving. Maybe an inch at a time if you held up a hand to measure. "Hey," I said quietly, not wanting to sound weird, "does that star look like it's moving to you?" Jonah didn't answer at first. He was half asleep on his blanket. Ariana turned her head and squinted up at the sky. "Which one?" I pointed directly at it. The star froze. It stopped so abruptly I thought my eyes had tricked me. It sat perfectly still, indistinguishable from every other point of light. The moment Ariana followed my finger, there was no movement. Nothing strange, just a normal sky. I let my hand fall. "Never mind. I think I'm just tired." Ariana shrugged and lay back down. Jonah mumbled something about grabbing another beer and wandered inside. I stayed upright, watching that same patch of sky. And after about 10 seconds, the star started moving again. A fraction at a time. A patient, deliberate glide, like it wasn't trying to hide so much as avoid being seen in motion. My mouth went dry. I waited another minute to be sure, then called out again. "Ariana, look, now it's moving." She sat up with a sigh. "Which one? You gotta show me." I pointed. And again, instant stillness. No drifting, no sliding, no movement at all. A strange pressure settled into my chest, something like embarrassment mixed with a creeping sense that the timing wasn't a coincidence. The moment someone else looked, it stopped. I tried a third time. I waited until Jonah came back out with beers, gave it another 15 seconds until the star was unmistakably drifting again, then said, "You guys gotta see this. That one's shifting." Both of them looked up. I pointed. "Frozen." Jonah stared for a second, shrugged, and handed me a beer. "Man, you're just tired. Stars don't move sideways." I forced a laugh, but couldn't stop watching. When they went back to their conversation, the drifting resumed. Only this time, the star shifted downward, a subtle diagonal slide. Not fast, just steady. Like something testing boundaries. Ariana eventually headed inside to make tea, and Jonah went with her, leaving me alone in the field. I lay back down and fixed my eyes on the drifting star. I didn't blink for long stretches because every time I did, I feared I'd miss something. The movement grew slightly more noticeable. Still subtle, but steady enough that if I focused on another star beside it, I could track the difference. The drifting star crossed a gap between two faint stars and kept going. The space behind it didn't change. No afterglow, no streak, no trail. Just quiet, patient movement. I whispered, "What are you doing?" I hadn't meant to say anything out loud. The words slipped out because the silence was thick and the night felt like it was waiting for something from me. The star dimmed. Not by much, just a small pulse like a dying flashlight bulb. Then it brightened again gradually, returning to its normal intensity. I sat up. "Okay," I murmured. "That's not normal." And then, this part is what stuck with me more than the movement. The drifting star paused for the first time without me pointing at it. It hung there, faintly brighter than before. A prickling sensation spread across my arms. I felt exposed out there in the open, even though logically nothing around me had changed. The breeze had stopped. The cold felt sharper. And then the star resumed drifting, but now in a direction that made even less sense. Upward, against the natural arc of the sky, not rising like the rest of the stars, just climbing. A tiny climb, a careful shift. I stood up. When I broke eye contact for just 1 second, just long enough to brush dirt from my jeans, the star brightened again. A flash, brief but sharp. I froze. My heart felt lodged up in my throat. "Jonah!" I shouted. He slid open the back door and squinted at me. "What?" "Just come out here, please." He sighed but stepped onto the porch. What now? I pointed at the sky without speaking. The star locked into place instantly. Jonah stared. Which one am I? And before he finished the sentence, the star went dimmer, just slightly, like a fading bulb. He frowned. That one? It's just twinkling. No, I said, it's been moving, sliding. Stars don't slide, he said gently. I lowered my hand and stared again. The star remained perfectly still, but I felt watched, not stared at emotionally, more like someone calculating distance, measuring, waiting. Jonah gave me a weird look, but eventually went back inside, murmuring something about me needing sleep. I stayed alone in the field. When I looked back up, the star didn't drift right away. It waited. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Then it slid again, but this time much faster. Not fast enough to streak, but fast enough that I muttered, "Holy shit," under my breath when I saw it cross a visible distance. It moved toward another cluster of stars, then stopped dead. Then the sky brightened, not a flash, not a beam, just a brief thinning of the darkness in a small circle around that point. And everything in me screamed that something was about to happen. I stepped backward, my boots crunching in the dry grass. The drifting star pulsed faintly a third time. Then it faded. Not out of sight, out of existence, like something had turned off a light behind a tiny pinhole. The sky where it had been looked too empty, like there should have been a star there, but there wasn't. I waited for it to reappear. It didn't. 10 seconds. Nothing. 30. Nothing. A full minute. Nothing. When I finally tore my eyes away, I walked backward all the way to the cabin, unable to shake the feeling that if I looked up again too quickly, I would see the star above me instead of where it had been. Inside, I tried to explain it to Jonah and Ariana. Neither of them had seen anything unusual. They brushed it off as eye strain. Maybe one of those floaters you get when you stare too long at something bright. I didn't argue. It wouldn't have mattered. When we all went to bed, I lay awake for hours, staring out the small window near the bunk beds. Most of the stars looked normal, but every now and then when my eyes drifted away from a particular spot, I thought I saw a faint glimmer of movement in the corner of my vision, like something shifting just out of sight. And each time I looked straight at it, it stopped. I was lying on the hood of my car, parked off a turnout on the east side of Lake Oroville, when I noticed the star move. It was late August, hot even at night. The kind of heat that hangs in the air and makes every sound feel distant. I'd gone out there because the power was out in my neighborhood again, and sitting inside a dark apartment felt claustrophobic. Out by the lake, the sky was usually bright with stars, and I figured I'd stay an hour before heading home. The night was clear, except for a light band of haze drifting low over the water. I had the windows down, a lukewarm bottle of water next to me, and my phone dimmed to keep my eyes adjusted. I wasn't thinking about anything, just tracking the constellations, letting my brain drift. Star. There was a star near the edge of the Big Dipper that had caught my eye. Not brighter than the others, just slightly warmer in color. I stared at it for a while, mostly because everything else was too familiar, and this one felt new somehow. I thought maybe wildfire smoke was tinting it. Then it shifted sideways, just a tiny jump, not enough to be dramatic. More like the way something looks when you blink and realize you misjudged its position. I blinked again, harder this time, thinking maybe I was tired. The star stayed where it was. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and looked away for a second, focusing on the line of trees across the water. When I looked back, the star was still there, but something about it felt different, like it was trying to match the brightness of the stars around it and wasn't getting it quite right. I stared at it long enough that my eyes began to water. The moment I blinked, it shifted again. This time it moved smoothly. Just a slow drifting line to the left, barely noticeable unless you were already watching closely. I sat up on the hood, heart thumping a little harder now. A satellite, I told myself. A plane. Something logical. But planes don't move sideways like that, and satellites don't change direction. I kept watching. The star drifted for maybe 2 seconds, then stopped. Not a gradual stop, not a fade, an instant freeze. When it stopped, it looked exactly like every other star around it, same brightness, same color, same stillness. I couldn't remember the exact moment when it stopped being a star and became whatever it was. I slid off the hood and stood beside the car, wiping my palms on my jeans. The The air felt heavier now, like the pressure had gone up a little. A warm breeze came off the lake, but didn't make me feel any better. I tilted my head to look again, but the star hadn't moved since freezing in place. I reached into the car and grabbed my phone to take a picture. When I raised the phone, the screen flickered. Not a normal glitch, more like a slow dimming, then a sudden return to full brightness. It did it twice before I could even open the camera. I lowered it and the flickering stopped. I waited another minute before trying again. Same flickering. I set the phone down on the passenger seat and stepped away from the car entirely, maybe 30 feet. The gravel crunched under my shoes, echoing across the dry air. When I looked up a third time, the star was gone, not moved. Gone. The spot it had occupied was empty, swallowed by darkness. No faint afterglow, no slow fade, just missing. I whispered no under my breath, as if that would change anything. I scanned the sky for something moving, something out of place. But everything looked normal. The constellations were where they should be. The horizon was quiet. Then something flickered near the tree line across the lake. A brief glint, metallic like moonlight hitting a smooth surface. I froze. The trees were too far away for me to make out details, but the reflection had come from above them, not within the branches. I squinted, trying to see if it would happen again. Instead, I heard a low hum. Not loud, so low it was almost more sensation than sound. It vibrated in my ribcage, deep and faint, the way distant engines sometimes do. The hum lasted maybe 3 seconds, then faded. Right after it stopped, the star reappeared, not where it had been, much lower now, halfway between the top of the tree line and the cloudless sky. It appeared in a blink. One moment empty space, the next moment a single point of light glowing too steady to be a reflection. Every instinct in my body told me not to look directly at it, but I did. The star drifted upward this time, smooth and slow. It didn't follow a straight line. Its path wobbled slightly, like someone guiding it by hand and adjusting too late. The motion wasn't natural, not the smooth arc of a satellite or the soft drift of a balloon. It looked deliberate. I felt something tighten at the base of my skull. A pressure. Not painful, just present. Like awareness pointed back at me. I stepped backward until I hit the door of my car. My hand found the handle without me thinking, and I pulled it open, ducking inside. I kept watching the thing through the windshield, even as I fumbled for the ignition. When the engine started, the star froze again. Mid-drift, mid-wobble, just an instant stop. The pressure in my skull faded immediately. I didn't take my eyes off it. My hand hovered over the gear shift. The star blinked, not flickered, blinked. Off, then on, too fast and too clean to be anything atmospheric. The moment it blinked back on, it was farther away, higher in the sky, smaller, retreating. I realized then I was shaking. My legs felt hollow, like I could collapse if I let myself. I put the car into drive and rolled forward slowly, keeping an eye on the sky and another on the narrow turnout road ahead. As the car moved, the star blinked again, then a third time. Each blink repositioned it higher, dimmer, farther, until finally it blended back into the sky, indistinguishable from the other stars. A perfect match. If I hadn't been staring directly at the spot, I never would have known anything changed. Once the star disappeared into normalcy, the night sounds returned. Crickets. A distant boat engine, a splash from the lake shore. The warm breeze cooled again. I drove home slower than usual, checking the mirrors constantly. Nothing followed, nothing moved. The sky looked ordinary. When I got home, my phone battery, which had been at 78% when I left, was at 22%. No apps had been opened, no calls made. A notification glowed across the screen for a split second before vanishing. Sky pattern interrupted, 10:41 p.m. I don't have any app that sends messages like that. I sat in my apartment for a long time, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. But every time I tried to replay the moment in my head, I failed to pinpoint exactly when the star stopped being a star. It shifted too seamlessly, too quietly. And now, every time I look at the night sky, I catch myself staring too long at whichever star looks slightly out of place, wondering if it's going to slide sideways again. I woke up to the sound of the wind chimes on my balcony, the soft kind of clinking they make when a breeze pushes through. It took me a second to register it because my apartment in Flagstaff never got much wind at night, especially not in early September when the air sat still and warm. I waited for another gust, ready to fall back asleep, but the chimes kept moving even though nothing else did. No shifting trees, no rattling blinds, nothing. Then the sound cut off all at once, like someone grabbed the chimes with their hand. The silence that followed felt strange, heavier than the usual quiet of my street. I sat up, listening. No cars in the distance, no neighbor's TV bleeding through the wall, even the hum from the old fridge felt muted. It was like the whole apartment complex had taken a breath and held it. I checked my phone, 2:17 a.m. I swung my legs off the bed and walked to the sliding door. The blinds were closed, but a faint light pressed through the gaps. Not bright, not any color I could name. More like the glow from a computer screen through a curtain. I pushed one slat down with my finger and looked outside. The balcony was empty. The chimes hung still. The light didn't seem to come from anywhere specific. It just existed around the space. Not a beam, not a reflection. Just a soft haze sitting in the air, and the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't lighting the balcony so much as tinting it. I opened the door an inch to listen. The air outside felt warm and thick, like the moment before a monsoon storm, but the sky was totally clear. The neighborhood below, a small row of apartment buildings and a few storage units, looked normal, except the shadows seemed slightly off. Not stretched, not moved, just shaped wrong. I stepped out far enough to touch the chimes. They were still swaying lightly, even though I didn't feel any wind. When I grabbed them, the motion stopped, but the light didn't change. It stayed fixed, almost patient. I went back inside and closed the door. I remember thinking maybe there was a new construction light somewhere down the street, something the city had installed without notice. But the light didn't behave like any normal source. It didn't flicker. It didn't brighten or dim. It had no direction. I tried to shake it off and went to the kitchen for water. When I flicked the switch, the lights took a full second to come on. Not a normal slow start, more like something delayed them. Same with the faucet. The water sputtered at first, then came out normally. All these tiny things I would have brushed off during the day felt huge and out of place at that hour. As I lifted the glass to sip, the chimes sounded again. One soft clink. Then silence. I froze with the glass halfway up. I knew I hadn't opened the balcony door again, so nothing should have moved them. I didn't hear footsteps or voices or animals, just that single tap of metal hitting metal in a dead still night. I walked back to the sliding door and pushed the blinds aside, fully this time. The light was gone. The balcony looked like it always did. Cheap concrete, a folding chair, a potted cactus I kept forgetting to water. The streetlights below flickered the way they usually did. Everything seemed normal, except the quiet still felt wrong, like the world hadn't fully restarted after something paused it. I checked the sky. No glow, no plane, no clouds. I locked the door and went back to bed, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing just outside on the balcony. Not watching, but waiting. It was a pressure I couldn't explain. I rolled over to face the wall and tried to ignore it. At some point, I drifted off. When I woke again, it was 3:41 a.m. and the room felt colder than it should have. Not freezing, just wrong for early September. I sat up, rubbing my arms. The apartment heater hadn't turned on, so the temperature drop made no sense. Then I noticed a faint glow under the bedroom door. Not the overhead light, not the hallway bulb. This glow was low, close to the floor, and it pulsed very slowly, like something breathing. I stepped toward it and pressed my ear to the door. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no movement, just that thick silence again, like sound itself couldn't get in. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. The glow came from the living room window, which faced the parking lot. It wasn't the same color as before. This one was more gray than blue, but still not a shade I'd seen lights make. It filled the room without bouncing off anything. The shadows didn't shift or stretch. They just sat there. Against my better judgment, I walked toward the window. I felt drawn in a weird way, not pulled but nudged. When I got close enough to see outside, the glow vanished, leaving the room dark except for the faint orange street lamps. I scanned the lot. A few cars, a couple empty spaces, the dumpster at the far end. Nothing moved. Then I noticed something odd. The car alarms. Every car had its little red dashboard light blinking in sync. Not fast, not slow, just perfectly together, like someone timed them all to match. I watched for maybe 10 seconds before the lights all froze mid-blink. Every single one. Then they resumed blinking, but out of sync again, like normal. I stepped back from the window so quickly I hit the counter behind me. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what any of it meant, but I didn't want to witness the next thing, whatever it was. I sat on the couch with every light on, scrolling through my phone even though I wasn't reading anything. The silence pressed in again, heavier this time. I kept listening for any sound that proved the world was still moving. A passing car, a humming AC unit, anything. Eventually around 4:20 I heard something. A soft scraping on the balcony. Slow. Uneven, like someone dragging a foot or brushing their hand along the concrete. I walked to the sliding door, staying to the side so I wouldn't be visible if someone was out there. The scraping stopped. I waited, holding my breath. Then the chimes tapped once. Just once. I didn't open the door. I didn't look. I backed away and sat against the far wall until the first hint of sunrise. The second the light outside turned from black to gray, the pressure in the apartment lifted. The silence broke. I heard a bird, a car door, someone's shower turning on next door. It felt like everything snapped back into place. When I finally stepped onto the balcony, the chimes hung perfectly still. The cactus was untouched. The concrete looked normal except for one thing, a small patch near the railing that felt slightly warmer than the rest, like someone had been standing there. No footprints, no marks, just warmth on a cool morning. I stayed out there for a minute, listening for anything out of place. The world sounded loud again. Traffic, birds, people leaving for work. All normal. I went inside, took a long shower, and tried to tell myself I'd imagined most of it. But even now, months later, the wind chimes sometimes ring in that same gentle pattern, always at night, always when the air is completely still. And every time it happens, that heavy silence settles in for a moment before everything goes back to normal. I was driving west through Nevada on Route 50, the part they call the loneliest road, on my way to California. It was late, maybe around 1:40 a.m., somewhere between Ely and Fallon, and I'd been driving for hours without seeing another car. Just empty desert, mountains way off in the dark, and the occasional old gas station that looked like it hadn't been open in years. I was low on gas and needed to stretch my legs anyway, so when I saw the blue highway sign for a rest stop ahead, I pulled off without thinking much. Just a simple concrete building with a handful of parking spots, a water fountain, some picnic tables out back. Nothing fancy. Maybe 6 or 7 other cars and trucks scattered around the lot, all empty. I figured people were sleeping in their vehicles. I've done that before. The sky was clear, full of stars, dry heat still clinging to the asphalt even at that hour. I left the car running for a minute, cracked the door, and stepped out. The silence hit me right away. Not even a breeze. Just that thick desert quiet where even your shoes on the gravel sound too loud. I locked my car, took a quick walk inside to use the bathroom. Fluorescent lights, humming vending machines, the usual. The building was empty. No attendant, no travelers. Just me and the weird buzz of overhead lights. I checked the mirror while washing up. My face looked more tired than I felt, like I hadn't slept in days. I remember thinking that because it felt like I had slept the night before, but looking at myself gave me a second of doubt. On my way back out, I stopped near the bulletin board by the door, one of those community cork boards with old flyers for missing pets and weather warnings. I wasn't looking for anything, just zoning out. That's when every single car alarm in the parking lot went off at once. Not staggered, not even a second apart, just all at once. Lights flashing, horns blasting. I jumped back instinctively and ran outside, expecting to see someone messing around out there. But the lot was still completely empty. The cars were going nuts, headlights strobing, horns overlapping, echoing off the building and out into the desert. My ears were ringing from the sound. I looked at my own car. The lights were flashing, horn blaring like the rest of them. I'd locked it, sure, but nothing should have triggered it. And the other cars? Some were old enough they barely looked functional, and here they were, freaking out like they'd all been hit with the same signal. I stood there frozen for a second, trying to decide whether to run back inside or get in the car and go. And that's when it happened. Everything stopped. The alarms, the lights, the sound, cut off instantly. No fading out, no delay. just silence, like someone hit a universal mute button. And then it got darker, not all around, just above. I looked up, and the stars were gone. Not all of them, but this one section of sky right above the lot was just blank. No clouds, no shimmer, just black, like something huge had moved over us and was blocking the stars. I couldn't make out a shape, no edges, no lights, but the stars around it made the absence obvious. A smooth oval of darkness, bigger than anything I've ever seen in the air. It didn't make a sound, no engine, no wind. It didn't ripple or shake or shimmer like heat waves. It just floated there. I felt the air shift around me, but not like a breeze, more like pressure or a drop in temperature that I couldn't quite feel on my skin but knew was there. I don't know how long it stayed, might have been 10 seconds, might have been a minute. Then it drifted. Slowly, without turning or tilting, it moved east. The stars behind it reappeared, one by one, like they were being unblocked. It passed over the rest stop building and kept going until the sky looked normal again. No alarms restarted, no lights came back on, everything stayed quiet. I walked back to my car, the locks were still engaged, the engine hadn't been touched. I sat down inside, shut the door, and just sat there, hands on the wheel. I didn't drive right away. I kept waiting for something else to happen. More lights, another sound. But nothing came. After maybe 5 minutes, I turned off the engine, grabbed my phone, and walked back into the building. I didn't really know what I was doing. Maybe hoping someone else had seen it too. The vending machines were still humming, the fluorescent lights still buzzing. I walked behind the counter, probably not allowed, but I didn't care, and found the monitor that showed the security camera feed. It was paused on a frozen screen. I tapped the keyboard. Nothing happened. Mouse wouldn't move. Looked like it had locked up. Eventually, I found the old desktop tower under the counter and power cycled it. It booted back up, loaded the feed screen. All the cameras, 4 of them, showed normal images. The lot, the door, the hallway, the vending machines. I rewound the footage to just before the alarms went off. The feed jumped from 1:42:11 a.m. to 1:43:37. Just skipped. Nothing recorded in that window. Every camera did the same thing. I copied the footage onto a USB drive that was already in the system. Not sure why, just felt like I should. Then walked back out. I drove the next 3 hours without stopping all the way to Reno. Didn't even look at the sky. Kept the radio off the whole way. When I checked the USB the next day, the file played fine, but the gap was still there. Just cut out like it never happened. I still have it. I don't know why. I've shown a couple people, but it's not proof of anything, just some skipped time and silent images of a place that looks completely normal. I haven't driven that stretch of 50 at night since. I lived on the 6th floor of a brick apartment building in downtown Spokane, right across from another identical complex. My unit faced west, and the balcony overlooked a narrow alley between the 2 buildings, maybe 20 feet across, with dumpsters and those old, rusted fire escapes zigzagging down the opposite wall. It was a Tuesday night. I remember because I had work in the morning and I was trying to wind down early, but I couldn't sleep. It was one of those hot nights in late August where everything feels sticky and the box fan in the window just moves warm air around. I'd taken a shower and was standing barefoot on the balcony in gym shorts and a t-shirt, sipping on one of those canned cocktails. The sky was clear and the street below was mostly quiet, just the occasional car or someone yelling a block away. I don't smoke, but I do this thing where I stand outside just to reset my head a little. No headphones, no phone, just leaning on the rail, watching the windows across from me or staring up at the dark. A lot of people in the opposite building keep their blinds open, which is weird considering how close we all are. You can see way too much if you're the type to look. That night, I noticed something off around 10:40. I remember that because I had just checked the time before deciding to go out and finish my drink on the balcony. There was a light floating in the alley, not on the ground, not high in the sky, just sort of suspended in the air, maybe 3 or 4 stories up, around my eye level, slightly off to the right. At first I thought it was maybe a drone, somebody screwing around on their roof, but it wasn't moving. It was just there. It looked about the size of a basketball, white, but not harsh. The kind of white you see in fog lights, soft edges, slightly blue, no blinking, No sound, just steady, quiet light. I stared at it for a while, trying to make sense of it. My brain went straight to the usual stuff: reflection from a car below, or maybe a weird projection, or one of those utility lights on a building I'd never noticed. But the angle was wrong. It was hovering a few feet out from the opposite building in midair. I leaned over the rail a little to get a better look, and that's when I felt it. My ears popped. Both of them. Like I was changing elevation fast. Not painful, but sudden. Like when you drive into the mountains and your head doesn't catch up. The pressure hit all at once, and then just stayed. Not heavy, but uncomfortable. The kind of thing you want to yawn through, but yawning didn't help. I stepped back from the railing instinctively. My heart wasn't racing yet, but something in my chest felt wrong, like my body knew before my brain did. The light hadn't moved, still perfectly still, right between the buildings. Then the sound dropped out. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't that things got quiet, it was like everything got turned off. The fan behind me in the apartment was still spinning. I could see it through the sliding glass door, but I couldn't hear it anymore. No car sounds, no fridge hum, nothing. I looked around. My head felt fuzzy, like I'd stood up too fast. There was a strange pressure behind my eyes, and a ringing started. Faint at first, then constant. Not high-pitched, but low and steady, like standing too close to an engine room. That's when I started to feel scared. Not because anything had happened yet, just because it didn't feel like anything I'd experienced before, and not in a cool or interesting way, in a wrong way. I backed toward the sliding door, still facing the alley. The light was maybe 15 feet from the railing, close enough to hit with a rock if I threw hard. But I didn't move fast, and I didn't look away. When I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the pressure in my ears got worse. My balance felt off, like the floor was tilting slightly to the left. The ring in my ears stayed. I turned on all the lights in the living room and kitchen. It was a reflex. I don't know why I did it. I stood there for a minute, hands on the counter, waiting for the pressure to ease. I thought maybe I was having a vertigo episode or some kind of panic attack. I splashed water on my face. Sat down on the couch, didn't turn on the TV, didn't touch my phone, I just waited. Eventually, the feeling faded, the ringing dimmed. I yawned and my ears popped again, and it felt like the pressure finally let go. I looked back toward the balcony. The light was gone. I walked over and slid the door open again, just a crack. Leaned out. The alley was dark. A single porch light was on 3 floors below across the way. No movement, just silence and a warm breeze coming up from the street. I closed the door again, drank some water, sat down, then I checked the time. It was 12:28. That stopped me. I double-checked, pulled down the phone screen. The time didn't change. I checked the microwave clock, same thing. I'd gone out onto the balcony just after 10:40. I was sure of it. The drink wasn't even halfway done. I hadn't sat down or fallen asleep or watched anything. There was no gap. I remembered everything. The light, the pressure, going inside. But somehow almost 2 hours had passed. I stood there in the kitchen holding my phone, just trying to think of what could explain it. I checked my call history, my browser, the camera. Nothing. No texts, no apps open, no background music or timers running. I walked the apartment like I was going to find something out of place. Nothing was. Everything looked exactly how I'd left it. My keys were on the counter. The front door was still locked. The drink was still sitting on the balcony railing where I'd left it. Condensation gone. The can warm to the touch. I didn't sleep that night. I laid on the couch with all the lights on and the fan turned to its highest setting, just listening, waiting for the pressure to come back, watching the clock move normally, minute by minute. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I looked outside again. The alley looked the same. Dirty pavement, dumpsters, a few old leaves caught in the corners, no marks, no burn spots, no scorch on the railing, no sign, anything had been there. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? Now, sometimes when I'm out on the balcony and it's late and quiet, I catch myself staring at the space between the buildings again, right where that light had been, waiting, listening. So far, it hasn't come back, but I still don't stand too close to the railing. I woke up at exactly 3:11 a.m. because of a sound I didn't hear so much as feel. It was this low humming, like standing next to a huge generator or transformer, but it didn't come from any one direction. It felt like it was coming from inside my chest. Not painful, not even loud, but dense somehow. I sat up thinking maybe it was a dream, but the vibration was still there, not the kind you get from a bass speaker. Deeper than that, lower. It stopped maybe 5 or 6 seconds later, just cut off completely. I looked around the room in the dark. Everything seemed normal until I glanced at my phone on the nightstand. The screen showed the time, 3:11, but the charging symbol was gone. I reached for it, and the cable was still plugged in, but the phone wasn't charging. I sat there for a few seconds, and then I noticed the hallway outside my bedroom was pitch black. Normally, there's a little glow from the stove clock and the router lights out in the kitchen, but it was completely dark. I got up and went out into the hallway. Every digital clock in the house was blinking: microwave, oven, cable box. Even the little one I keep in the laundry room, which is battery operated, was blinking like it had been reset. I checked my phone again, and it was charging now. It had 72%, which is weird because I plugged it in at 19% before I went to sleep. I remember the number because I almost didn't bother plugging it in. The power had obviously gone out at some point, but nothing else in the house had tripped. No breakers, no blown bulbs. I looked out the front window and the street lights were still on. The neighbor across the road has those cheap solar-powered walkway lights, and those were glowing too. I live in a small town outside Missoula, Montana. Quiet neighborhood, mostly older folks, not a place where weird things usually happen. I stood there looking out at the street for a while, thinking maybe a transformer had blown and reset some stuff without killing the lights completely, but I never heard anything like that before. And that humming, I don't know. It felt like it was inside the house, inside me, but left no trace. I eventually went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up every hour or so, just feeling on edge. No more sounds, no more vibrations. Just that uneasy static in my chest like something was waiting. The next day, I asked my neighbor Wayne if his clocks had reset. He said no. His power had been fine all night, and his security camera didn't catch anything. He's retired and runs a bunch of little cameras off a DVR system. He offered to check the timestamp, but said there were no gaps or glitches between 3 and 4 a.m. Later that evening, I noticed something else. My thermostat had been bumped. It was set 4 degrees higher than usual. I don't remember touching it. I live alone, no pets, no one else with access. The weird thing was the override mode was on, like someone had manually adjusted it at the wall unit. It's one of those Honeywell smart thermostats, and I usually control it through the app. When I checked the app history, there was a gap in the logs. Right around 3 a.m., I didn't say anything to anyone else, just tried to brush it off. But 2 nights later, I woke up at almost the exact same time, 3:12 a.m., and felt that same vibration. This time, it only lasted about 3 seconds. I sat up, waiting for it to stop, and it did, just like before. I got up immediately, checked the clocks, and they were all fine. Nothing was blinking. But the room smelled faintly like hot electronics, like the scent you get when a laptop's been running too long. I went out onto the back deck and stood there for a bit. The air was cold and still, no wind at all. I kept looking up, scanning the sky for something, anything, but it was overcast and the clouds were too thick to see any stars. Then I noticed the porch light, which is motion activated, was still off. It should have triggered when I stepped out. I waved my arm at it, nothing. I even stepped off the deck and walked across the gravel. Still nothing. When I came back inside, I pulled the bulb from the fixture to check it. It wasn't hot, it wasn't even warm. But when I screwed it back in and flipped the breaker just in case, it worked again. It lit up immediately like nothing was wrong. That night, I fell asleep on the couch with all the lights on. It just felt better that way. Safer, maybe. For the rest of the week, nothing happened. No more humming, no strange smells, no electronic glitches. But then that Saturday, something new did happen. I went to grab dinner with a friend in town, Courtney, and when I got back to my house, the driveway security light triggered before I even pulled in. That part wasn't strange. What was strange was the notification I got on my phone. My smart home app had logged unusual movement at 3:10 p.m. and again at 3:11 p.m. from the indoor living room cam. When I checked the feed, it was just static. The whole minute was a solid gray fuzz. Then the footage picked up again, completely normal. No sign of anyone in the house, nothing moved or missing. I downloaded the clip and tried boosting the contrast on my computer. It didn't help much, but I noticed there was a moment, barely a second, where the static pulsed just slightly, like something passed in front of the lens, blocking the light. It wasn't shaped like a person or even an object. It was just a slow, dim shift in the brightness, almost like a shadow where there shouldn't be one. I unplugged the indoor cam after that, haven't plugged it back in. I still don't know what any of it was. I haven't told Courtney or anyone else. What would I even say? My clocks blinked and my porch light didn't turn on. A few weeks have gone by now, no more humming, no more glitches, but I've noticed a pattern. I wake up now at almost exactly 3:11 a.m. most nights. No alarm, no noise. I just open my eyes, check the clock, and it's always within a minute of that time. It's not fear anymore. It's more like something waiting, like I'm supposed to notice something and haven't yet. I moved the bedroom clock out last night and put in an old analog one. No lights, no digital anything. I still woke up at 3:11, but this time I didn't move. I just lay there, breathing quietly, eyes closed. I swear the air felt different for a few seconds. Like something big had just passed through the room without touching anything. Then it was gone, and I went back to sleep. I was fishing alone off the dock behind my uncle's cabin. This was up in Minnesota, a little lake called White Birch, maybe 40 minutes from Bemidji if you're driving slow. We'd been going up there every summer since I was a kid, but this was the first time I'd gone out alone in the fall, just to get away for a few days. I had some vacation time to burn, and I wanted quiet. It was mid-October. Air was cold, but still manageable if you layered up. Clear night, no wind, the kind of stillness where sound carries for miles. No motorboats, no partiers, no bugs, just water and pine trees and silence. It was around 10:45 p.m. I'd been out there a couple hours already, sitting at the end of the dock with a folding chair, my lantern on low behind me, and a thermos of coffee going lukewarm by my foot. I wasn't really trying to catch anything serious, just wanted to sit out in the cold air and unwind. There was no moon, but the stars were sharp, and the water was calm enough to reflect them. No ripples except from my line. I just reeled in and cast again when I noticed it. A faint glow, deep under the water, way out past the reeds on the north side of the lake. At first I thought it might have been someone's underwater dock light, but it was too far out, maybe 30, 40 yards from shore, and it wasn't stationary. It moved. Slowly. In a straight line. It wasn't flashing or pulsing, just this constant pale glow, like a spotlight pointed straight down but diffused through the water, not bright enough to light anything above the surface. Just this soft circle moving steadily along, about the size of a pickup truck, maybe a little bigger. I couldn't tell how deep it was, but definitely well below the surface, deep enough that you couldn't see any shape attached to it, just light. At first I just watched it, thinking it might be something normal. A submerged flashlight on a float? Maybe a prank? But it was so smooth, slow, and deliberate that I found myself standing without realizing I'd moved. It kept coming. I didn't hear anything. No motor, no wake. The water around it didn't ripple or churn, it just glided straight to the dock. I stepped back from the edge, feeling this weird pull in my chest. Not like fear, not yet, more like a pressure, like being too close to something you weren't supposed to see. It kept moving. At one point, I thought it might turn off or drift away, but it didn't. The line it was following led straight to me. Not the dock in general. Me. Dead center. I backed up to where my chair was and turned down the lantern to give my eyes a better chance to adjust. I wanted to see it clearly. I don't know why. Curiosity maybe, or maybe it was something else, like I couldn't look away. When it got close, the glow seemed to dim slightly, or maybe it just looked that way in contrast to the deeper water. It slid right under the dock and stopped, directly beneath me. The glow didn't change color, it didn't pulse, it didn't make a sound, just sat there under the boards, maybe 8 feet below the surface, like it was waiting for something. That was the moment I felt afraid. I don't mean panicked, I didn't run, but this cold, heavy stillness settled in my gut, like being watched from below, like something looking up at me that shouldn't be there. I crouched slowly and tried to look between the gaps in the planks. Nothing. Just darkness and the faintest silver-green glow radiating from under the surface. No shapes. No beams. No bubbles. It didn't seem to touch the dock at all, like the water around it was untouched. It stayed there for maybe 10 seconds. Could have been more. I didn't count. I was too focused on keeping still. I don't even think I was breathing properly. Then it started moving again. Same direction, straight line, right past me and toward the deeper part of the lake. I stood and turned to follow it, walking to the other side of the dock, careful not to make noise. It didn't speed up or change direction, just kept gliding, deeper and deeper until the glow started to fade. It didn't blink out, it just sank lower until it vanished into the black. When it was gone, I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled and listened. Nothing. Still no wind, no animals, no sound from the woods. I turned the lantern back up and sat down. My hands were shaking a little, but not badly. Enough to spill a few drops of coffee when I reached for the thermos. I stayed out there for maybe another 20 minutes, trying to figure out what I'd seen. I didn't fish anymore, just sat and stared at the water. Eventually I packed up and went inside. I locked the cabin door, which I don't usually bother with up there. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time the heater kicked on, I jerked awake thinking I'd heard something in the water. The next morning, I walked out to the dock again just after sunrise. The lake was glass. Not a ripple. No sign that anything had been there. I checked the underside of the dock, thinking maybe someone had rigged up lights for a prank or a night dive, but there was nothing. No wiring, no mounts, no scuff marks. The water was clear down to about 10 feet. Past that, just green-black and silt. I didn't fish that day. I stayed inside, read a book, drank coffee. I tried to forget about it. I even convinced myself I'd imagined it for a while. A trick of the light, a submerged log catching starlight, something explainable. Then I checked my watch. It's an old digital one, nothing fancy, just something I wear camping. I'd looked at it earlier that evening when I first sat down to fish. It had said 9:58. I remember because I thought it was earlier than it felt. But when I looked at it the next morning, it was blinking like it had reset, all zeros. The date had flipped back to January 1st, 2000. I hadn't bumped it or dropped it. The battery was fine. It was still keeping time once I reset it, but it had wiped itself clean sometime during the night. I didn't stay the extra night I'd planned. I packed up that afternoon and headed back to the cities early. I haven't been back to White Birch since. I was 9 when it happened. I didn't tell anyone for a long time, not even my older brother who I shared the room with. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. He was 12 and already in that stage where everything was dumb or boring unless it had explosions or a skateboard in it. It was late June. We lived in a one-story ranch house in northern Minnesota on the edge of a neighborhood that sort of faded into woods. My room faced the backyard, which ran into a bunch of trees, then a steep hill that dropped off toward the creek. We had a short chain-link fence, but it didn't cover the whole yard, just a section around where my mom had planted some flowers. That night I was still awake because it was summer, and I didn't have to be anywhere, and because I'd snuck a flashlight under my pillow so I could keep reading a Goosebumps Bumps book after lights out. My brother had passed out around 10, like usual. He always slept like a brick. I was reading, curled up on my side with the flashlight propped under my blanket when I noticed something weird. The light in the room shifted, even though everything was off. It was subtle at first. I thought maybe it was a car turning around or someone's motion sensor light in the yard next door, but it didn't flicker like headlights. It was steady, pale, almost gray-blue. I turned off the flashlight and lifted the blanket to look. The whole wall across from me, the one with the window, was glowing faintly. Not bright enough to light up the room completely, just enough that I could make out shapes. My dresser, the edges of the closet door, the lump of my brother in his bed. I sat up slowly. The glow was coming from the window, through the curtains. We had those thick cotton curtains with little stars printed on them, navy blue with yellow stitching. They didn't sway much, even if you opened a window. That's why it freaked me out when I saw them move. Just a little, like someone had brushed them with their fingers from the other side. I froze. thinking maybe it was the fan. But we didn't have one in that window. The window was shut. I was sure of it. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, not because I was worried about waking my brother, but because I suddenly had the thought that something might hear me. I didn't go all the way to the window. Just stood a few feet back and listened. There was no noise, no bugs, which was weird. Summer nights around there usually buzzed like crazy. I remember that part clearly. It was silent, like the house had been dropped under glass. The curtains shifted again, not a full swing, just a little ripple, like the air behind them had changed. I remember backing up and pressing my legs against my bed frame. Then the light outside started to move, not side to side, just down. It faded slowly, like it was sinking behind the hill. The glow in the room softened, then disappeared altogether. A second later, I could hear the bugs again, crickets and that high whine from the woods, like someone had hit play on the world. I didn't go to the window that night. I just got back into bed and pulled the blanket up to my chin and stared at the ceiling until the sky started to lighten. My brother didn't stir once. In the morning, I went to the window first thing. Not because I expected to see anything, really. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't imagined it. The screen was bent outward. Not the frame, just the mesh itself, like someone had pushed at it from the inside. One of the bottom corners was pulled away from the track. The lock on the window was still latched. I opened it and leaned out. The mulch under the window didn't look disturbed. No footprints, no trampled flowers. But the screen didn't make sense. It was pushed out like someone had leaned hard on it trying to get out. My brother came in behind me while I was still standing there and asked what I was doing. I told him the screen was messed up, and he said it was probably a raccoon or something. I didn't argue. I bent the screen back into place best I could. It never quite fit right after that. There was always a gap in the corner that let spiders in. That day, I checked all the other windows in the house. None of their screens were messed up, just mine. I didn't sleep much for the rest of that summer. Every night I thought about closing the curtains tighter or shoving a chair under the doorknob, but I never did. I just stayed very still, listening. Nothing ever happened again. At least, not like that. But I always wondered, if the window had been unlocked, what would have happened? I noticed the stars looked wrong before anything else happened. I was camping alone near the Coconino Rim, about 40 minutes outside Williams. It wasn't a serious backpacking trip or anything, just a quick overnight because work had been draining and I wanted a quiet night. I found a flat clearing off an old service road, pitched my tent, made some instant noodles, and sat back to watch the sky. It was one of those clear, dry nights where you could see every constellation like someone had wiped the sky clean. I was lying on my back on the foam pad outside the tent when I realized the stars directly above me seemed softer than the rest. Not dimmer, just slightly blurred, like I needed glasses. I blinked a few times, rubbed my eyes, even sat up, but the patch stayed fuzzy. It covered maybe a dinner plate's worth of sky if you held it at arm's length. Everything else looked sharp. I figured maybe some heat from my little camp stove was distorting the air, but the stove had been off for almost an hour. The air was still. No wind, no bugs buzzing near my ears, just dead, open quiet. I lay back down to stare at it. The blur didn't pulse or shimmer. It just existed, like a thin lens floating above me. I stared long enough that I started picking out individual stars inside the patch, and I saw something that made my stomach tighten. The stars inside the blur seemed to shift ever so slightly. Not twinkle, shift, like their positions were being nudged around. I sat up again, feeling stupid for getting nervous over something I couldn't even name. I told myself it was atmospheric ice crystals, or some balloon drifting high enough to warp the light. But the more I watched, the more I realized the patch was moving. Slowly, but moving. It drifted about the length of my thumb held up to the sky, sliding westward. The rest of the sky held still, crisp and normal. Only that patch smeared like the stars were behind warped glass. I listened for a plane. Nothing. I listened for wind. Nothing. I checked my phone for the time, 10:47, and when I looked back up, the blurred patch had shifted farther, picking up speed so slowly I didn't notice until I compared its position to a line of bright stars along the horizon. Then something flashed inside the blur. Not bright enough to blind me, just a faint pulse, like distant lightning behind clouds. Except there weren't any clouds. Another pulse came a few seconds later, soft, bluish, dull around the edges. Not lighting up the ground, just faintly illuminating whatever was causing the distortion. I stood up, a little shaky, and walked a few steps toward the tree line. The pine needles under my boots barely made a sound, which felt strange on its own. Normally they crackle. That night they were like damp carpet. The blur drifted more quickly now, sliding across the sky with a steadiness that didn't fit anything I knew. Not a satellite, not a plane, not even a slow-moving cloud bank. It felt intentional, controlled, but too quiet and too slow for anything mechanical. When it passed a particularly bright star, the star elongated into a streak for a split second before snapping back into place once the blur moved on. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry. I stepped backward, bumping into my tent. That small sound, the tent poles rattling, felt jarring against the rest of the quiet. I backed inside and sat down, trying to keep the flap open so I could still see the sky. I didn't want to lose sight of whatever was happening, even though part of me didn't want to see any more. The blur moved toward the western ridge. Just as it reached the top of the tree line, a faint buzzing started. Not loud, not like an insect, more like the hum of a power line half a mile away. It vibrated in my chest more than in my ears. I held my breath without meaning to. The hum changed pitch, higher, then lower, then settling into something steady. Then it stopped, completely. The blur froze too, hovering in place above the ridge. I crawled halfway out of the tent, trying to keep some fabric between me and the open air for reasons I didn't fully understand. My head stuck out just enough to watch the sky. The blur stayed still for a long stretch of time. At least a minute, maybe more. It felt longer. I looked around at the clearing. The shadows from my small lantern were weirdly sharp, like the light wasn't diffusing normally. My tent's shadow stretched farther than it should have, thin and crisp. I turned the lantern off just to see if it made a difference. The clearing went dark, but the tent shadow stayed faintly visible, even without a light source. That's when I got goosebumps. I turned the lantern back on immediately, just to break the feeling. In the sky, the blur finally moved again. Not the drifting motion from before. This time it slid sideways in a perfectly straight line. Too smooth, too exact. It shifted like a cursor on a screen, then paused again. Another soft flash glimmered inside it, this one slightly brighter. Still no beam, no shape, just the faintest glow contained within the distortion. The hum started again. This time it came with a faint fluctuation in the air pressure, like when you drive through a tunnel with the window cracked. My ears popped. I ducked back into the tent completely, pulled the zipper halfway, then stopped myself. Zipping it all the way felt worse somehow, like I needed to be able to see out. The hum rose, then stopped for the second time. I waited for whatever would follow. Nothing happened for almost 30 seconds. Then the blur began to stretch. It elongated into an oval, thinning along one edge like it was being pulled. The stars inside the stretched area warped like reflections in rippling water. The blur grew longer and longer until it didn't look like a patch anymore. It looked like a line, a faint smear cutting across the night. Then it snapped back into its original shape. Just snapped. Instant. I gasped quietly. That sudden motion made my heart lurch. I backed away from the tent flap without closing it, pressing myself against the far wall of the nylon like it offered real protection. The blur began drifting again, this time faster, heading west, away from my campsite. As it moved, the stars behind it regained their sharpness, like the sky was returning to normal piece by piece. The hum faded with it, thinning until it was barely noticeable, then gone. I crawled forward again, watching the blur shrink as the distance grew. It didn't fade exactly. It just got smaller, like it was moving impossibly far away very quickly. At a certain point, I couldn't tell if it was still the blur or just a patch of cloud. Then it condensed into a small point of soft light. The point blinked once, then disappeared. Just like that. The sky was perfectly clear afterward. Every star sharp, every constellation where it should be. The air moved again, too. I felt a breeze lift the edge of my tent flap and brush my cheek. It was such a normal sensation that it felt surreal. I stepped outside, slowly, scanning the treetops and ridgeline. Nothing unusual. The buzzing was gone. The weird shadows from the lantern looked normal again. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes, turning in slow circles like an idiot, trying to catch any lingering trace of what I'd seen. There was nothing. Eventually, I sat back on the foam pad, exactly where I'd been when the night started feeling strange. The stars looked completely ordinary. I didn't sleep well. Every rustle in the trees made me sit up. Every shift of wind made me check the sky, but the blur didn't return. In the morning, the campsite looked untouched, but something felt different. Not physically, just a heaviness in the air, like the night had left a residue my mind couldn't shake. I packed up camp earlier than planned. On the drive back toward town, I stopped at a turnout and stepped out to look at the sky again. Bright blue. Normal. But as I stood there, a weird feeling settled in me, like the clarity of the sky was too perfect, like something had smoothed it over. That feeling hasn't gone away completely, and sometimes when I'm outside late and the sky is really still, I catch myself staring up for a long time, waiting to see that slight blur sliding across the stars again. It was around 1:30 in the morning, early September, and I was camping solo just outside Pinedale, Wyoming, off one of those dirt roads that dead ends into trailheads. I'd pulled my truck off a little side spur, maybe a quarter mile from the main Forest Service road. Nothing official, just a flat patch where someone had clearly camped before, had a small fire ring and everything. I wasn't doing anything fancy, just needed to get out of town for a night. Brought a cooler, a chair, my tent, and a couple books. I'd left my phone in airplane mode to save battery and hadn't seen a single car since dinner. Weather was crisp but not cold, sky totally clear. I'd been reading with a headlamp in my tent for maybe an hour before I decided to call it. I turned the lamp off and lay there in my bag, just listening. Noticed how loud the insects were. All the usual summer forest stuff. Some distant owl, breeze moving through trees, tiny creaks and snaps, but overall, pretty peaceful. After maybe 20 minutes of just lying there trying to sleep, I caught it, a very faint light, not in my tent, but through the wall. It was steady, pale, and coming from the direction of the woods maybe 100 yards out. At first I figured it was the moon, but I remembered there wasn't one that night. I'd checked earlier, and it was that kind of intense, starry dark sky you only get when there's no moon at all. I sat up and unzipped the side of the tent. The light was still there, faint but visible through the trees. It didn't flicker like a fire or sway like a lantern. Just steady. White. Maybe the color of an old fluorescent bulb. Too pale to be a headlamp. I watched it for a minute, not sure if it was moving or if I was just blinking weird. The weirdest thing was how still everything had gotten. It was like all the bugs had stopped. No breeze either. Just a weird, too quiet air and that steady light. I didn't go toward it. I don't know why, but I just had this feeling like I shouldn't. Instead, I reached for my flashlight, stepped out of the tent slowly, and stood there with my hand on the zipper. I didn't turn the flashlight on right away, just wanted to see if my eyes would adjust. As soon as I stepped out, I realized something else. It wasn't casting any shadows, like I had a chair and a cooler maybe 10 feet in front of me. I should have seen a faint outline of something cast back toward me, but nothing. It was like the light was visible but not interacting with anything. That was the part that really freaked me out. I kept staring at it for maybe 30 seconds, trying to make out where it was coming from. No shape, no movement, just a sourceless glow out past the trees. Then in an instant, it went out. Not dimmed, just gone. When it disappeared, the air sort of pressed in. It was like the forest took a deep breath again. Crickets picked back up, wind rustled somewhere behind me. Everything went back to normal, but I felt off. Not panicked exactly, just unsettled. I stood there for a while, flashlight still off, waiting to see if it would come back. It didn't. Eventually I got back in the tent and zipped it shut, but I didn't sleep. Every little sound outside made me freeze. I kept checking the fabric to see if light was coming through again. It wasn't. Around 4 a.m., I finally drifted off, but it was that light, shallow sleep where every sound snaps you halfway awake. I got up just after dawn, packed everything fast. Tent, cooler, didn't even bother with coffee. Drove back down the dirt road with my windows half down listening. On the way out, I stopped and walked a little into the woods where I thought the light had been. There was nothing there. No burned logs, no trampled grass, no gear, just pine needles, and dirt. Not even a game trail. It wasn't a campfire, and it sure as hell wasn't a person walking with a light. I've hiked enough to know what those look like from a distance. This was different, too still, too clean. It didn't seem to touch the ground, just hung there, like a bubble of light someone forgot to turn off. I drove home with the radio off. Didn't really feel like music. Just sat in the silence of the cab and tried to figure out what could have made a light like that. I still don't know. I noticed the fitness tracker thing first. It was a Wednesday morning, early January, and I was still half asleep when I rolled over and checked my wrist. I usually did it without thinking, just part of the routine. But this time the screen showed something that jarred me awake. Movement detected, 3:12 a.m., 3:18 a.m., 6 minutes. I never get up in the middle of the night. I'm a ridiculously heavy sleeper. And even if I had, I would have remembered something that long. I sat up, confused, trying to convince myself it was a glitch. My apartment in Sandpoint isn't big, just a one-bedroom above an auto shop, so if I had walked around, I would have heard the creaky floorboards or knocked something over. Everything looked normal. But when I opened my bedroom curtains, the sky looked wrong. It was 6:47 a.m., still too early in January for any real sunrise, but the entire sky had this faint, washed-out brightness to it, like someone had turned on a backlight behind the clouds. No color, no sunlight, just a pale glow that didn't belong at that hour. I checked the weather app. Cloudy, snow expected later, nothing unusual. But the sky didn't look like storm light. It looked like when you shine a flashlight through your hand and the light spreads in all directions. I kept staring at it, feeling a slow uneasiness creep up my back. I told myself to stop overthinking it. I went to make coffee, scrolling through my notifications, pretending the tracker thing didn't bother me. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. 6 minutes is a long time, too long for sleepwalking, and I'd never done that before in my life. I checked the tracker's details again. Steps recorded 74. Heart rate elevated around 110 BPM. Location, that last part didn't make sense. My tracker used my phone's GPS, barely accurate indoors, and it said I hadn't left the room. How could I get 74 steps without going anywhere? I rubbed my face, trying to shake the creeping dread. Maybe I'd tossed and turned. Maybe it misread something. I tried to believe that. Then I looked at the carpet. Right beside the bed, the fibers were flattened in a long, curved pattern I didn't recognize. Almost like someone had shuffled their feet there repeatedly. I stepped on it, testing the shape with my own movements, but it didn't match anything I'd done recently. The indentation stretched from the foot of the bed toward the window. My stomach tightened. I walked over and pulled the curtains aside again. The sky was still that strange, bright gray color. No sun, no visible clouds, just an even wash of light like the world had been dimly backlit. Something about it felt watched. I got dressed quickly, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside onto the metal stairway that led down from my unit. The air was sharp with cold, and the brightness above made everything on the ground look slightly desaturated. It wasn't snow glow either. The shop lights were off, the street was empty, and none of the neighbors had porch lights on. But the sky, it felt too close, like it was pressing down. As I reached the bottom of the steps, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting an email or calendar reminder. Instead, the fitness app flashed a notification I'd never seen before. Movement data incomplete. Sync error at 3:16 a.m. I stared at the screen, trying to figure out what that meant. The tracker had obviously logged something, so why was the app saying it lost data halfway through? I walked around the side of the building, looking up. The brightness didn't come from anywhere specific. No beams, no reflections. It just existed, like the atmosphere itself was glowing faintly. And then I heard it, a low hum. Not loud, deep, like something vibrating through the air rather than a sound traveling across it. It felt more physical than audible, almost like the hum you feel standing next to a big transformer, except there were no transformers nearby. The nearest one was 3 blocks away. The hum lasted maybe 2 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Right when it stopped, the sky dimmed slightly, like someone easing their hand off a dimmer switch. Not enough to look normal, but less bright than before. I turned slowly, scanning the rooftops, the empty street, the lot behind the shop. No movement, no cars, no one out walking their dog, just quiet stillness and that strange fading light. I went back up to my apartment because suddenly the outside felt too exposed. I locked the door behind me, which felt ridiculous. I wasn't scared of a person, but I locked it anyway. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the flattened carpet again. I tried recreating the pattern with my feet, standing in place, pivoting, shuffling, but the indentation was smoother, more uniform, like weight had been applied evenly, not concentrated on heels or toes. And the curve of it, it was too rounded, almost like someone had paced in a semicircle rather than walked straight. My heart started pounding. I checked my tracker one more time, hoping the data would look normal after a resync. But instead of correcting itself, it showed something new. 3:12 a.m. detected heart rate spike before movement. 3:13 a.m. detected standing position. 3:14 a.m. motion recorded. 3:15 a.m. motion continues. 3:16 a.m. sync error. 3:17 a.m. sync error. 3:18 a.m. motion stops. 3:18 a.m. heart rate drops suddenly. The tracker only logs heart rate drops like that when I'm sitting or lying perfectly still after being active. It didn't match anything someone would do sleepwalking. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to slow my breathing. That was when I noticed something else. Something I should have noticed earlier. The window was unlocked. Not fully open, just shifted enough that the latch wasn't fully in its catch. I always locked it. Not because I was paranoid, but because the drafts in winter were awful otherwise. I got up and touched the frame. It was cold. Normal cold. But the latch felt slightly warm, like someone had pressed a thumb against it. I locked it again with a shaky hand. Around 7:20, the sky finally started to brighten normally. The strange backlight faded into actual daylight, and by the time cars began moving on the street below, everything looked ordinary again. But when I checked my fitness tracker at work during lunch, a new notification was waiting. Unverified movement pattern detected. Review? I tapped it. The app displayed a simple graphic, just a line. A curved line, looping tight and shallow, repeating the same arc over and over. It looked almost identical to the flattened pattern in the carpet. Location, bedroom, duration, 6 minutes. Height variation, none. I turned off the screen and set the watch face down on my desk. I didn't review anything else. The sky has looked normal every night since then, but sometimes, especially early in the morning, I wake up with the uneasy feeling that the room isn't empty. And every time, before I move or turn or breathe too deeply, I check the carpet, just to make sure the pattern isn't back.